Chapter 217. As the wedding date approached, the festive atmosphere in Ice Stone City became more and more intense. However, Colin and Vera's wedding this time was still too rushed. Furthermore, the Northern Frontiers Rebellion was still ongoing, so the wedding scene would not be particularly grand. The invitations had already been sent out, but with such a short notice, it was estimated that only a few lords nearby would be able to attend the wedding in time. In order to prepare for this wedding, Butler Eamon had been extremely busy these past few days. The tax officer, Quincy, had no choice but to temporarily put down his work to help Eamon relieve the pressure. It was a good thing that Ice Stone City wasn't lacking in labor right now. When the slaves who were deeply grateful to Colin heard that their lord was about to marry Miss Vera, they instantly looked as if they shared the honor and worked even harder. In just 3 to 4 days, hundreds of livestock were slaughtered. Mountains of barley, vegetables, and fruits were also transported to the storage room. Honey, cheese, butter, and of course barrels of wine were also prepared. On the day of the wedding, the entire city would celebrate and pray for the Lord and his wife together. According to the tradition of the Radiant Empire, the noble's wedding ceremony would be held in the Radiant Church. The Radiant Church of Ice Stone City was located on the east side of the Red Castle. The interior of the church was completely built with marble. The blue and white dome was more than 100 meters high and was supported by 18 huge stone pillars. Now these stone pillars were covered with festive white garlands. The oil painting depicting the story of the first holy night on the dome was also wiped clean and looked brand new. The colorful glass reflected the main entrance of the church. This 10-meter-high large arch would only be opened during important ceremonies. In front of the arch stood a magnificent bronze statue. It was the image of the founding emperor of the Empire of Light, the only level 8 legendary paladin in history, Garner San Lorenzo. The knight's sword in his hand emitted a chilling light under the sunlight, as if it could be swung down at any time. His majestic face was vivid and lifelike, making people unable to help but have the urge to worship him. Viscount Angley, you need to stay under King Garner's statue for 10 seconds. Scholar Dwayne was teaching Colin about wedding etiquette. Yes, it's right below the knight's sword. Alright, stop moving. Put your left hand on your chest and look straight ahead. Colin was like a wooden puppet. He would do whatever Scholar Dwayne told him to do. Alright, Your Excellency Viscounts, please follow my footsteps into the church. Yes, don't be in a hurry, take it easy. Very good. The wedding ceremony was actually not complicated, but Scholar Dwayne, who was very strict, forced Colin to rehearse it 10 times. Only when there were no more mistakes did he finally let go of Colin. Viscount Angley, today's rehearsal will end here. When you go back, please recall it carefully. If you have any doubts, feel free to ask me. Alright. Colin heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that holding a wedding was more tiring than fighting on the battlefield. Right now, he just wanted to go back and lie down for a while. After taking a few steps, Colin suddenly heard voices coming from the side hall of the church. He quickly asked, "Is Vera rehearsing over there?" "Yes." Scholar Dwayne seemed to have seen through Colin's thoughts. He quickly tried to dissuade him. "Your Excellency Viscounts, according to the rules, you are not allowed to see the bride before the wedding." Alright. Colin was a little helpless. He had no choice but to suppress his restless heart and walk out of the church. However, he was secretly wondering if he should sneak into Vera's room at night. The two of them had not seen each other for several days, and Colin suddenly missed the taste of the young girl. In the side hall of the church, Vera, who was wearing a white dress with vertical buttons, was slowly walking up the stairs under the guidance of the half-elf maid Kathy. Her head was covered with a white veil, and her long dress was dragging behind her, deliberately simulating the dress of the wedding day. However, it was indeed a little troublesome for her to walk with such a long dress that was 5 or 6 meters long. "Is this okay?" Vera stood on the high platform as she turned around to look at Kathy. Kathy looked at the long dress that was dragging a perfect semicircle on the stairs, before she nodded with satisfaction. "Yes, miss." Vera heaved a sigh of relief. She could not help but lift up the hem of her dress, revealing her slender thighs that were wrapped in flesh-colored silk stockings. Kathy took the opportunity to step forward and help her adjust the diamond necklace, that was hanging on her suede boots. "Miss, let's take a break before we go through the last process." "Okay." Vera nodded and listened carefully. She found that the main hall next to them was completely quiet. She knew that Colin had already finished his rehearsal. She looked at the half-elf maid who was standing at the side and suddenly asked, "Kathy, why did you give up the title of a baron in the half-elf kingdom and willingly come to the Red Castle to be an ordinary maid?" Kathy was stunned. She knew that sooner or later, the future mistress of the Red Castle would ask her this question. Moreover, she also knew that she had to be careful. This was because Vera would obviously be more concerned than Colin about whether she had ulterior motives. "Miss, I chose to stay by Viscount Angley's side because I wanted to use the power of the Viscounts to explore the Radiant Moon Forest." Radiant Moon Forest? Vera looked at the half-elf maid in surprise. "Isn't that place a forbidden area?" "It is said that no one who has gone there has ever come out alive." "Yes. However, there is an ancient prophecy recorded in the books of the Savoy family. When the long-tailed star cuts through the sky, the knights in blood-red armor will open the door to the forbidden forest." "Knights in blood-red armor?" Vera frowned. "Do you think that the knight is referring to Colin?" Kathy nodded. She could not help but think of the scene where Colin fought a bloody battle outside Silvermoon City. Vera thought for a moment, and realized that Colin really liked the color red. The main color of his armor was red, and the castle was also called the Red Castle. Previously, he had also discussed with her about changing the family badge and changing the main color to red. But based on this information, you are sure that Colin is the knight in the prophecy? Kathy hesitated for a moment before she asked again. "Miss, I don't know if you have noticed that the Viscounts only took less than 2 years to advance from a knight apprentice to a fourth-order knight." Vera was shocked to realize that Colin's speed of improvement was indeed terrifying. He was even comparable to the genius ancestors who were recorded in the House of St. Hilda, who were able to advance to the sanctuary realm. If she thought about it this way, Colin might indeed be the knight in the Savoy family's prophecy. It was understandable why Kathy chose to stay by Colin's side. She was preparing to use Colin's power to find out the secret of the disappearance of the elves. This secret was obviously more interesting to the Savoy family, who used to be the royal family of half-elves, than a mere baron title. To be honest, Vera was also very curious about the secret of the disappearance of the elves. The elves were the first race to explore the mystery of the arcane magic. Therefore, they were very important to every Yevil mage. "Can I have a look at the ancient book of the Savoy family?" Vera asked. "Of course, miss. I will send a letter back to Silvermoon City and ask someone to send a copy to you." "Well, thank you. You are too polite." Kathy was secretly relieved because she knew that she had been accepted by the future mistress of the Red Castle. Chapter 218. Fallen Eagle City. Count Oman's study was currently occupied by another man. He was sitting in the Count's personal seat, flipping through documents with great concentration, as if he had become the new master of this place. With a creak, the door opened, and the Count's lover Penny walked in. The man raised his head from the thick documents. It was Mr. Wang. "Has everything been arranged?" Mr. Wang looked at Penny and smiled warmly. Penny nodded and walked behind Mr. Wang to massage his shoulders. "The important assets of the Chamber of Commerce have all been transferred, and the key personnel will be evacuated tonight as well." Mr. Wang enjoyed Penny's massage and closed his eyes in comfort. He reminded, "Don't move too many people, it'll attract attention." I only notified a few managers in the city, and some managers with potential. Also, they are now under strict control, and will not have any contact with the outside world." "Good." Mr. Wang smiled in satisfaction. "Why don't you take one last look at this castle? In the future, you can only search for it in your memories." Penny smiled disdainfully. "What's there to miss in such a shabby place? I've tolerated the stinginess of the Oman family for too long." "Haha. Then what about the Lion's Roar Castle in Winter City? Too monotonous and tasteless." Mr. Wang was amused and asked again. "Then what about Phoenix Palace?" "Phoenix Palace is all right. Pan and I looked like she was in a difficult position." Mr. Wang shook his head with a smile, speechless at his sister's ambition. He pointed at a document on the desk and said, "Have someone wrap it up and send it to Ice Stone City. Consider it my wedding gift to Viscount Angley." "Okay." Penny nodded and then said in surprise, "If I remember correctly, Viscount Angley's wedding should be tomorrow, right?" "Yes. Later is later, it's better than nothing. We can't make it seem like the St. Thean family doesn't understand etiquette." "Okay." Penny picked up the document on the desk and scanned it. She laughed. "Aren't you afraid of angering Viscount Angley with a gift like this?" Mr. Wong also laughed. "No, after tomorrow he'll thank me." "Ha, you're right. I'll arrange for someone to send this gift to Ice Stone City. By the way," Mr. Fong called out to Penny, who was about to leave, and asked, "Is Viscount Angley's sister still in Fallen Eagle City?" "No, she hurried over to Ice Stone City the moment she received the news of Viscount Angley's wedding. However, with such a rush, I'm afraid she won't be able to make it in time for the wedding. Yes, she's still useful to us. Did you send someone to keep an eye on her?" "Of course." Penny nodded and left the study with a smile. As soon as she stepped out of the door, the butler who was waiting outside quickly reported, "Madam, Knight Vala has just returned." "Vala?" Penny frowned. "Isn't he at the front lines of the Rapids River? Why is he back now?" "Knight Vala was heavily injured in the battle and was sent back by the Count to recuperate." "All right, I got it," Penny replied casually. As Vala's mother, she didn't even ask about Vala's injuries in detail, nor did she seem to be planning to visit her. At the entrance of the castle, Knight Vala got off the carriage with the help of his squire. "Knight Vala? Is it really you? What happened to you?" Knight Vala heard a cry of surprise behind him after taking a few steps. Turning around, he saw a fatty with a body full of fat running towards him. Vala recognized that it was one of the stewards of the Tulip Merchant Guild, Oliver. Oliver ran to Vala's side while panting, greeting him with an exaggerated tone. "Sir Knight, you're injured? Ah, this is really too bad. Please allow me to send you back to your room to rest." As he spoke, the fat merchant went up to Vala and pulled her arm over his shoulder, before wrapping his own fat arm around Vala's waist. Vala didn't stop Oliver's overly enthusiastic help. Although he wasn't familiar with this steward of the Tulip Merchant Guild, he knew that Oliver's brother was currently in Ice Stone City and had been instigated by Colin. That was why Vala thought that Oliver was someone sent by Colin to contact him. "Mr. Oliver, you're too polite." After exchanging a few pleasantries, Vala signaled for his squire to leave and entered the castle with Oliver's help. After entering the room and closing the door, Vala sat by the bed and was about to test if this Oliver was really sent by Colin. However, before he could speak, Oliver spoke first. "Knight Vala, I think something big is about to happen in Fallen Eagle City." Vala's expression changed, clearly not expecting him to say something like that. However, looking at Oliver's anxious eyes, he still asked patiently, "What did you discover?" Oliver hurriedly lowered his voice and said, "Sir Knight, after you left with the Count, Lady Penny began to secretly transfer the assets of the Tulip Merchant Guild. Moreover, all the stewards, including me, are being strictly monitored. Just now, Lady Penny summoned us and said that we have to leave Fallen Eagle City tonight. Moreover, we are not allowed to return home, nor are we allowed to inform anyone of this. That is why I suspect that something big is about to happen here." Vala furrowed his brows, clearly noticing that something was wrong. After some thought, he asked, "Then did Penny have any other unusual actions during this period?" Oliver nodded and said in a low voice, "Sir Knight, you should know that since the beginning of the year, Madam Penny has been in charge of the Fallen Eagle City's renovation and reinforcement project, right? Most of the construction materials used for this renovation project were purchased from the Tulip Merchant Guild. However, I noticed that there was something wrong with the purchase price of these construction materials." "What's wrong?" "One of the materials is called bluestone fragments, but the price is 5 copper coins per pound." Seeing Vala's blank expression, Oliver knew that he was not sensitive to the price of this stone and hurriedly explained, "Sir Knight, this is already more than 30 times the normal price of bluestone fragments." Only then did Vala come back to his senses. His first reaction was, could someone be using this opportunity to amass wealth? However, he quickly rejected this guess. If it was to amass wealth, they would not have done it so obviously, and only increased the price of bluestone fragments. Moreover, they did it so fiercely that it could be seen through at a glance. "What do you think is going on?" Vala asked humbly. Oliver nervously rubbed his hands and whispered, "I suspect that it's not bluestone fragments at all." "Then what is it?" Oliver's voice was trembling. "I went to the construction site and saw that the palms of the laboring slaves were all pitch black. That is why I suspect that it's not bluestone fragments that are used to fill the gaps between the limestone, but coal." "Coal?" Vala's brows were knitted together. "Aren't coal used to make fire and forge weapons? Why do they need to buy so much coal to renovate Fallen Eagle City?" At this point he was stunned. That was because a terrifying thought flashed through his mind like lightning, causing him to shudder uncontrollably. Chapter 219. The 15th of May was the Empire of Light's annual Easter. Legend had it that on this day, the god of light, who had sacrificed himself for the human race, would be resurrected and bring forth the final judgment. Those who believed in him, followed his teachings, and spread his glory would ascend to heaven, while those who were false, evil, and heretics would fall to hell. Thus this day was also known as Judgment Day. Ice Stone City appeared peaceful and beautiful under the light of the morning sun. On such a beautiful day, the master of the city was about to hold a grand wedding ceremony. At 8 o'clock sharp, the knights of the Angeli family were already waiting in front of the church's entrance. They wore full sets of armor and luxurious robes. They held their knight swords in front of them, their gazes firm and their expressions pious. Behind the knights was the church's choir. They all wore white priest robes and chanted hymns. At the same time, purple irises floated in the air. Dong 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 amidst the melodious sound of the bell, the church's door slowly opened. The faceless statue of the god of light could be seen clearly in the main hall, as if it was watching everything in front of it. The first batch of guests were nobles from the half-elf kingdom. They were led by Duke Modawin to the front of the church. Eamon and Quincy stood on either side of the door, their faces flushed red as they greeted the guests. Following them were the lords near Ice Stone City. There weren't many of them, only a mere 9 people. Perhaps it was because time was too tight that the lords further away couldn't come to watch the ceremony. Or perhaps, the Duke of St. Hilda's rallying power was far from what it used to be. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the Duke of St. Hilda finally appeared. The Dukes of the North wore a red duke's suit today. His beard was also carefully groomed, making him look dignified and elegant. The arrival of the Duke meant that today's male and female protagonists were about to appear. However, before that, there was a large group of bridesmaids. They were all daughters of nobles from the northern frontier, who came to watch the ceremony. They all wore yellow evening gowns and colorful garlands on their heads. As for the groomsmen, there was only one Baron Raymond. This was also the first knight that Colin had met who swore loyalty to him after coming to this world. He was also the first vassal that he had personally conferred. About 800 meters away from the church, 2 carriages pulled by 4 tall horses were slowly moving towards the church, one in front and one behind. The person sitting in the carriage in front was, of course, today's groom. Colin was wearing a simple black suit with a rose on his chest. He looked rather emotional. They were actually getting married. In his past life, before he transmigrated, he was still single. Although he had had many girlfriends, he could never take the final step. It should be because I didn't have a strong father-in-law like the Duke of St. Hilda in my previous life. Just as Colin was lost in his thoughts, the carriage arrived in front of the church. Baron Raymond stepped forward to open the door and helped Colin out. After Colin got out of the carriage, he couldn't help but look back at the carriage behind him. Vera was inside, but of course he couldn't see anything now. "Viscounts, please." Baron Raymond thought that Colin had forgotten the procedure, so he quickly reminded him. Colin smiled and followed Raymond into the church. As soon as he stepped through the church door and stepped on the long red carpet, the wedding march started playing. At this time, the Duke of St. Hilda also came to the back of the carriage and opened the door. Today's focus, Vera, finally appeared in front of everyone's eyes. She was wearing a pure white veil and an ivory wedding dress made of silk. The 5-meter-long dress was spread out with layers of lace, and the silver crystals on the hem of the dress formed a beautiful arc. Purple irises and sparkling diamonds covered the upper and lower layers of the wedding dress. The delicate and simple elements made it a perfect blend of low-key and luxurious. The beautiful arc of the tube top made her slender waist look very slim, and half of her shoulders were exposed. There was a pure emerald on her chest that exuded a faint halo, and the same color gemstone earrings swayed slowly with her movements. The only strange thing was that Vera only wore one of her earrings, and the other one was empty. However, the people present didn't notice this detail. Most of them were already fascinated by this girl, who looked like an angel descending to earth. Her snow-white skin looked even more delicate in the ivory wedding dress. She was wearing a pair of white lace gloves, and she was gently holding the Duke of St. Hilda's arm as she slowly walked towards the church door. As she walked, her slender legs were tightly wrapped in white lace stockings, and her milky white high heels inlaid with fine diamonds sparkled. There were also 2 white gold and diamond chains tied around her delicate ankles, and they added more moving details to the sexy and soft lines of her beautiful legs. The Duke of St. Hilda held Vera's hand as they walked along the red carpet into the magnificent main hall of the church. When they arrived in front of Colin, the Duke of St. Hilda looked at the young man's face with a trace of emotion and nostalgia. He stopped, turned around, and said to Vera, who was dressed up, "My daughter, father will accompany you to this point." Vera stared at the Duke, but she didn't say anything. The thin veil couldn't completely cover her expression, but the Duke couldn't find any trace of reluctance on her face. He sighed secretly and finally put Vera's hand in Colin's hand. He then turned around and walked down the stage. There was a warm applause in the church, but such a lively atmosphere made the Duke of St. Hilda look even more lonely. His eldest son and second son had already passed away. His younger brother was defeated and captured, and his younger sister was already married. Now Vera was also about to leave him. The Duke of St. Hilda, who was known as the Lord of the Northern Frontier, was about to become a lonely man. Colin's eyes stayed on the Duke's back for a few seconds before he immediately looked away. He could feel the Duke's loneliness, but he didn't feel any pity for him. People who only had themselves to blame did not deserve any sympathy. A thin middle-aged man wearing a white priest's robe walked in between Colin and Vera. His name was Beth, and he was the new bishop of Icestone City after the emeritus bishop left. Bishop Perth's gentle voice echoed in his ears. "Colin Angeli, in poverty, in sickness, in pain, in wealth, in health, in happiness, in poverty, in sickness, in pain, in wealth, in health, in happiness. Will you stay by Vera St. Hilda's side and protect her forever?" "I am willing," Colin replied sincerely as he looked into Vera's eyes. "Vera St. Hilda, no matter if you are poor or sick, are you willing to stay by Colin Angeli's side and stay by his side for the rest of your life?" "I do." Vera's eyes were sparkling with tears as she made a serious vow. "In the name of the God of Light, I officially declare you husband and wife. May the light of the Lord illuminate your future path." Now the bride and groom can exchange rings. A 4 or 5-year-old boy ran up and handed the ring box to the newcomers. However, Colin did not take the box from the boy's hands. Instead, he took out a sapphire earring from his chest pocket. When Vera saw the earring, she could no longer control her emotions. She had mixed feelings and 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks. Colin smiled gently as he lifted Vera's veil. He gently wiped away her tears before putting the earring on her head. The people who were watching the ceremony were obviously confused. Logically speaking, there should not be such a part of the wedding process. However, this small part that only belonged to Colin and Vera was the real proof of their love. The scene where they fought side by side at the Rapids River and sacrificed themselves to save each other appeared in front of their eyes again. Bishop Beth coughed softly, as if he was reminding the newlyweds not to forget the proper wedding process. Fortunately, Colin did not want to be too unconventional. After putting the earring on Vera's head, he picked up the ring box and put the rings on both of them. Bishop Beth heaved a sigh of relief, as if his mission had finally been completed. He then announced loudly, "Now the groom can kiss his bride." As soon as Vera heard the bishop's words, she closed her eyes and stood on her tiptoes as she leaned forward. Colin was a little nervous for a moment. However, When he looked at the pretty face in front of him, he finally took a step forward and kissed the girl's red lips. It was very sweet. Chapter 220. Fallen Eagle City. Vala knocked on the door of a house in the west of the city. Not long after, a middle-aged woman opened the door and walked out. She obviously recognized Vala and quickly bowed. "Good day, Knight Vala. Is there anything I can help you with?" "Good day, Madam Oliver. Your husband has asked me to deliver a letter to you." Vala handed over a letter as she spoke. Madam Oliver quickly thanked her and took the letter, reading it carefully. Her husband had not returned home for more than a month. She had gone to the Tulip Merchant Guild to look for him, but was told that Oliver had left with a merchant group and would not be back for some time. This made Madam Oliver feel a little strange, because her husband would always tell her a few days before he left and ask her to prepare his luggage. However, there were no signs this time. After reading her husband's letter, the worry on Madam Oliver's face became even more intense, and she quickly asked, "Sir Knight, where is my husband now? Do you know?" Vala shook her head. "My apologies, madam. I am only helping him deliver the letter. I can't say anything else. However, I suggest that you do as he says." Madam Oliver seemed to understand something and nodded. "All right, I will take the children and leave Fallen Eagle City now." She then bowed apologetically to Vala and hurried back into the house. Vala left soon after, but he did not go far. Instead, he found a seat by the window in a nearby tavern. About an hour later, Madam Oliver walked out with the two young boys, followed by 3 servants carrying all kinds of bags. They hurried out of the city. Vala immediately followed them. However, Madam Oliver's group was stopped at the city gates. In fact, all the residents who tried to leave the city were stopped, and the guards at the city gates loudly announced, "Today, Fallen Eagle City only allowed people to enter and not leave." Madam Oliver kept pleading with the guards to be lenient, and even took out a considerable amount of bribes, but she was still mercilessly rejected. Vala hid not far away, and watched for a while before shaking his head and turning to leave. The bad premonition in his heart grew stronger and stronger. At the same time, he was even more certain that the House of St. Thean was going to cause trouble in Fallen Eagle City. How should he inform Viscount Angley? Vala was a little worried. In fact, he had purposely allowed himself to be injured and recuperated in order to cooperate with Colin to secretly take over Fallen Eagle City. However, he had not expected that before their plan had even begun, the House of St. Thean seemed to have beaten them to it. The ground of the street had just been repaved, but as long as the layer of gray gravel was removed, a layer of black coal could be seen underneath. Vala arrived at an empty alley and drew her knight's sword. The blade emitted a faint holy light, before turning into a streak of golden lightning and slashing at the wall. Rumble! Gravel flew everywhere. Vala quickly checked the hole in the wall, and found that there were also pieces of black coal aside from limestone shards. The commotion this time was rather loud, and had clearly attracted attention. Voices could be heard from outside the alley, and Vala quickly left quietly. With this series of discoveries and the information provided by Oliver, Vala had basically confirmed the House of St. Thean's plan. However, what puzzled him was why the House of St. Thean was doing this. As he was deep in thought, Vala did not notice that the people around him were getting fewer and fewer, until they completely disappeared. By the time he realized that something was wrong, he had already been surrounded. "I am Vala Oman. Who are you people?" Vala drew her knight's sword and roared. The 8 armored knights surrounding him did not speak. They were all wearing helmets, and their faces could not be seen clearly as they approached Vala in silence. "Mother, is that you?" Vala shouted, as if trying to lure Penny out to meet him. Unfortunately, his question did not receive any response. He did not know if Penny did not want to see him, or if she was not present at all. Vala sighed as if he had accepted his fate. He swung his long sword at a knight in front of him. Clang, 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 clang. The sound of metal clashing could be heard everywhere. Vala tried to break out of the encirclement, but there were too many enemies, and they were not weak either. His charge was interrupted halfway. Tch! A long sword pierced through Vala's back and came out from his chest. Vala screamed in pain and fell to the ground. Tch! The enemy stabbed him in the back twice more before leaving quietly. As night fell, Ice Stone City regained its peace. It was even quieter than usual, because there was a curfew in Ice Stone City tonight. The residents grumbled for a bit before they could only obediently hide in their homes and go to bed early. However, they did not sleep for long before many people were woken up by the heat. They touched their faces and bodies and realized that they were covered in sweat. They looked out of the window. It was still pitch black, but there seemed to be some light flickering. Why was the spring night in the northern frontier so hot? Oliver's wife was also woken up by the heat. The child beside her was crying nonstop, asking for water. She could only get out of bed to get some water. But when she stepped barefoot on the ground, she realized that the ground was actually a little hot. Just as she was feeling puzzled, she vaguely heard a commotion outside. Oliver's wife did not want to be nosy at first, but a servant suddenly rushed over and shouted, "Madam, madam, it's bad. The house next door is on fire." Oliver's wife was stunned for a moment before she ordered, "Then why aren't you going to help put out the fire?" "Yes, yes." Oliver's wife furrowed her brows, but did not take it to heart. However, the fire quickly grew bigger and bigger, gradually showing signs of going out of control. Moreover, Oliver's wife saw that many places in the city were on fire, and she could vaguely see thick smoke rising into the sky. More and more residents ran out of their houses naked, shouting on the streets. They did not even care about the curfew anymore. The soldiers also did not care about the residents who were running around and shouting, and they all joined the crowd to put out the fire. However, not only was the fire in the city not put out, it was burning even more fiercely. Buckets after buckets of water were poured down, turning into steam after a few sizzling sounds, and the places that had just been put out were still burning red, as if they could not be put out at all. "The House of St. Theon wants to burn down Fallen Eagle City. Everyone, follow me out of the city." Knight Vala, who was already dead, suddenly stood up and shouted at the crowd. However, his call did not receive much response. The residents of the city found it hard to believe such terrifying words. Moreover, their belongings were all in the city, and they would not be willing to give it up unless they had no other choice. Vala shouted as he ran, but there were only a few people who were willing to follow him out of the city. In just a short while, the fire in the city had become even fiercer and fiercer. Red flames constantly emerged from the ground and shot up into the sky. The flames shot higher and higher, and the originally weak circle of fire became a sea of fire in the blink of an eye. It was only then that most of the citizens realized that something was wrong, and finally began to believe Vala's words. More and more people followed him out of the city. However, when they reached the city gates, they were shocked to find that the walls of Fallen Eagle City had already turned into a wall of fire. Vala tried to continue forward, but he was forced back by the intense fire and choking smoke after a few steps. Something was wrong. Vala immediately realized that if it was just coal, the fire would not have spread so quickly. After all, it was not that simple to make coal burn, and the fire in the city must have been affected by something else. If Vala could fly up to the sky and look down, she would discover that the flames rising from Fallen Eagle City had gradually spread into fire dragons. These fire dragons intertwined with each other and gradually formed the pattern of an extremely profound arcane array. The center of the formation was where the Oman family's castle was. There was not a single trace of fire there, and only a lone figure wearing a mage robe stood at the highest point of the castle, holding a dagger in his hand as he chanted. The raging flames illuminated his face, and it was Mr. Chong. The raging flames in the city illuminated the night sky as if it was daytime. Screams of agony could be heard, and the smell of burnt meat wafted in the air. This hellish scene did not move Mr. Chong at all, and he slowly raised the dagger in his hand. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk he gouged out his left eye. Chapter 221. Ice Stone City. After nightfall, the banquet hall of the Red Castle gradually became lively. The newly married viscounts would be hosting a banquet for all the guests who had come to attend the wedding. The luxurious hall of more than 600 square meters was paved with red paulownia wood. 2 long oak tables were placed on both sides of the hall, with all kinds of fine wine and delicacies on them. The well-dressed attendants stood beside the long tables like statues, ready to serve the guests at any time. However, very few people came here to eat. Even if they did, they would only try a little. It was rude to eat and drink in such an occasion. The guests in the hall were divided into two groups. The beautiful and charming ladies were gathered in the resting area on the left, and they would occasionally let out bell-like laughter. A young girl who looked no more than 15 years old became the target of the ladies' teasing. This was because she was the one who had received the flowers that Vera had thrown to her during the day. This meant that she had received the bride's blessing and was about to become the next lucky person to get married. The young girl's face was as red as a ripe apple, and it was unknown whether she was shy or excited. The well-dressed gentlemen were gathered on the right side of the hall. They gathered in twos and threes, holding a glass of champagne in their hands as they chatted amiably. It was unknown how much consensus and tacit understanding they had reached, or how many schemes they had conspired against each other. Among these male nobles, there was an obvious core, the Duke of St. Hilda. He just stood there quietly, taking small sips of the champagne in his glass. Although he did not say anything, the surrounding nobles still took turns to greet him. If they received a few words of praise from the Duke, they would immediately become drunk, and their faces would turn red with excitement. However, the Duke of St. Hilda was of noble status, and the nobles did not dare to disturb him too much. After a few words, they tactfully left. Thus, Scholar Dwayne became the target of everyone's conversation. The topic of discussion naturally could not stray away from the current chaotic situation on the northern frontier. Those who were able to attend this wedding were definitely vassals loyal to the Duke of St. Hilda. At this moment, they were all wantonly attacking the St. Thean family, the Oman family, and the Dawson family, as if they could not wait to immediately lead their troops to the battlefield and kill these traitors of the northern frontier. Scholar Dwayne chuckled as he dealt with the suzerains, feeling rather disdainful in his heart. After the Great Purge last year, the powerful forces among the lords of the northern frontier were basically wiped out. At this time, the nobles in front of him were basically new lords, who had just been in theft not long ago. The army in their hands was too weak. Not to mention the Duke of St. Hilda, even Scholar Dwayne looked down on them. What the Duke truly valued was still the Angeli family's army. Only this young man who had inherited Marquis Garcia's legacy could make the Duke of St. Hilda personally come to Icestone City at such a critical time and marry off his beloved daughter. Of course, even though Scholar Dwayne was disdainful of the nobles who came forward, he still had to put on a front. While dealing with the nobles, he was also secretly observing the Duke of St. Hilda. Then, Scholar Dawn keenly noticed that the Duke seemed a little absent-minded tonight. Just as the atmosphere of the banquet was getting more and more lively, Colin and Vera finally appeared in a new set of clothes. Colin had changed into a red and black viscount's suit with a delicate rose pinned to his chest. He looked elegant and handsome. Vera had also changed out of her wedding dress, which was inconvenient for her to walk around in. She had put on a white low-cut backless dress. Her blonde hair was tied up into a bun, and her blue eyes were clear and bright. Her dress fluttered in the wind, and her figure was graceful and graceful. Her beauty was pure and delicate, and the beauty of youth and maturity combined to form a unique charm on her body. Applause sounded as the newlyweds were welcomed into the hall. A huge wedding cake was pushed out by Kathy. The butler, Eamon, handed a silver table knife to Colin and motioned for him to cut the cake together with Vera, so that everyone could share the cake. Colin smiled as he handed the table knife to Vera. He then held her hand and cut a small piece of the huge 8-layer cake. Bang! A bottle of champagne was opened, and the bubbles immediately sprayed onto the newlyweds' heads. Colin quickly hugged Vera in his arms to prevent her from getting splashed by the champagne. After playing around for a while, Colin handed the piece of cake that he had cut to the Duke of St. Hilda. He then handed the table knife to Vera and motioned for her to continue dividing the cake for the guests. He then walked through the crowd with the Duke of St. Hilda and came to a secluded corner. "I'm afraid that there won't be time for your honeymoon," the Duke of St. Hilda said straightforwardly. Colin nodded. He had already expected this. The Duke had personally come to Icestone City and even asked Vera to marry him. It would be strange if the Duke did not want anything else. I need you to mobilize the army as soon as possible and attack Iron Furnace City. If you can take down this city within a month, I will immediately make you an earl. Colin blinked and said carefully, Duke, of course I am willing to fight for you. However, I think that it would be better to take down Fallen Eagle City first. Oh, why? The Duke of St. Hilda tasted the wedding cake in small bites, his face expressionless. First of all, Fallen Eagle City is closer to Ice Stone City. Moreover, Earl Oman is weaker than Marquis Dawson, so we have a better chance of taking down Fallen Eagle City. Moreover, the St. Thean family is obviously closer to the Oman family. If we take out Earl Oman's nest, we can greatly weaken the power of the St. Thean family. Colin stated his reasons, but he did not mention the most important one. The fact that he had Vala as a spy in Fallen Eagle City was his trump card. He could not casually tell the Duke of St. Hilda about it. You think that the Oman family is the most important power of the St. Thean family? A mocking smile appeared on the Duke of St. Hilda's face. Is that not the case? The Duke of St. Hilda did not answer directly. Instead, he said mysteriously, Don't worry about the Oman family. They are nothing more than a fence-sitter who wants to please both sides. Moreover, I have a way to sow discord between them and the St. Thean family. Colin rolled his eyes as if he had understood something. Moreover, the dwarves are our biggest problem. The Duke of St. Hilda finished his cake and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He then ordered in an unquestionable tone, In 3 days, I hope to see your army depart from Ice Stone City and march into Iron Furnace City. Then, without waiting for Colin to respond, he reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Then he drifted away. The Duke's forcefulness made Colin very uncomfortable, but there was nothing he could do. He did not dare to oppose the other party directly. Rubbing his chin, Colin suddenly thought that if he could not resist directly, could he have Vala cause some trouble in Fallen Eagle City and make the Duke change his mind? While thinking, Colin decisively switched to the perspective of the blood thrall he had arranged in Fallen Eagle City. He wanted to see the current situation in Fallen Eagle City. But then, he was shocked by the scene in front of him. What was going on? Was there a fire? Colin instructed the blood thrall to climb onto a nearby roof. All he could see was a sea of red. Numerous fire dragons wreaked havoc, turning Fallen Eagle City into a fiery purgatory. He was instantly dumbfounded. It had only been a few days since he last saw Fallen Eagle City. How did it become like this? Of course, he could not find any useful information from the blood thrall's mind. If he wanted to know what had happened, he would probably have to ask Vala. However, all blood thralls had their own consciousness and could not be controlled by Colin at will like the blood thrall. He had to find Vala. But in this situation, where would Vala be? Colin looked around and found that there was no fire in the center of Fallen Eagle City. Moreover, a green pillar of light descended from the sky and enveloped the Oman family's castle. Colin, do you want to eat cake? Vera quietly appeared beside Colin and asked with a smile. Okay. Colin quickly came back to his senses and took the plate from Vera's hands with a smile. Chapter 222. Even though it was still late at night, the sky above Fallen Eagle City was as bright as day. The raging flames devoured everything in the city, and even the weeds within a few hundred meters of the city were scorched yellow by the terrifying heat. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the tightly shut city gates suddenly opened, and a group of knights charged out of the city. However, before they could escape the sea of fire, the sudden flames devoured them along with their horses. The knights who were still breathing struggled in the sea of fire, letting out ear-piercing screams that sent chills down one's spine. Moments later, the smell of roasted meat filled the air. Asterisk boom. Asterisk a section of the city wall finally collapsed under the scorching flames. However, even as the scorching smoke gradually subsided, no one was seen rushing out of the city. The entire Fallen Eagle City had turned into a burning furnace, but what was being tempered inside was not steel, but living people. The endless cries of agony had completely stopped at some point, and the countless lives that were being roasted into charcoal in the furnace seemed to have condensed into green smoke floating in the air. These wisps of green smoke were being driven by some unknown force, and they were gathering at the center of Fallen Eagle City. There, a green pillar of light descended from the sky like a gigantic transparent barrier, protecting the Oman family's castle. It was only here that there was the aura of living people. Vala opened his mouth wide, trying his best to take in a breath of air, but the burning in his chest did not ease at all. Instead, it seemed to be burning even more fiercely. While the green barrier blocked out the flames, it could not block out the suffocating air and the terrifying heat that could cook a person alive. Vala could hear a sizzling sound under his feet with every step he took, and the intense pain made him lose consciousness. In fact, if Vala had not been turned into a blood kin and had terrifying self-healing abilities, he would have died long ago. Even if his frightening self-regenerative ability would only bring more suffering to Vala, he did not give up and continued to stride toward the castle with determined steps. At the top of the castle, the figure in magician's robes held a staff in one hand and an eyeball in the other, loudly chanting an elven incantation. Thick green smoke enveloped his body and formed a huge green cocoon on top of his head. The surface of the green cocoon trembled as Mr. Chang chanted, as if something terrifying was about to break out of its shell. Sizzle! Vala reached out to grab the wall of the castle, the scorching heat instantly scorching his palm black. However, he didn't seem to feel it at all as he continued to climb upwards. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind: revenge. He wanted to take revenge for the 300,000 innocent citizens of Fallen Eagle City. Driven by vengeance, Vala seemed to have forgotten pain and fear. All she wanted to do was twist the head of that evil mage on the top of the castle. However, the closer she got to the smoke-shrouded silhouette, the more Vala felt a frightening pressure. Mr. Feng's not-so-tall figure seemed to have turned into some ancient behemoth, and under the overwhelming pressure, Vala felt as if she was an ant trying to challenge the gods. However, the ant didn't stop. He was getting closer and closer. Mr. Feng didn't seem to notice Vala's approach at all, as he continued to chant his incantation. Vala couldn't understand Elvish, and only felt that the foreign syllables were like venomous snakes drilling into her heart, trying to evoke the fear in the depths of her heart. Asterisk clang. Asterisk Vala drew out her knight's sword, the blade already turning red from the scorching flames. Just as she was about to launch her final charge, she suddenly noticed from the corner of her eyes that another figure was climbing up from the other side of the roof. That person was completely covered in armor, but Vala felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity from that person, as if they were her own kind. While the two knights were still in a daze, Mr. Chang's incantation seemed to have reached the final stage. He suddenly raised his left hand and crushed the strange eyeball. He shouted, "Let's go! Duke of St. Hilda, receive your judgment." Asterisk boom. Asterisk a bolt of purple lightning descended from the sky, as if it was tearing the sky apart in an instant. The lightning struck the green cocoon on Mr. Chang's head, and an incomparably dazzling light exploded. Vala only felt that her vision had turned completely white, and then she couldn't see anything anymore. However, she was delighted instead of shocked, and immediately realized that this was the best chance for revenge. Although she couldn't see anything, Vala still charged out according to the direction in her memory. Colin, who was controlling the blood thrall, also realized that he couldn't see anything, but he still heard Vala's voice, and quickly controlled the blood thrall's body to charge out as well. When the blinding light gradually faded, Colin finally saw a blurry image in front of his eyes. Ah! Vala's blood-curdling screams rang in his ears, and Colin focused his gaze to see Vala rolling on the roof, while holding half of her face. Mr. Chang was also in a terrible state. His entire right arm had been cut off at the base, and fresh blood splattered all over the roof, corroding the thick limestone into wisps of green smoke. Colin immediately guessed that Vala must have cut off Mr. Chang's right arm, but was burned by the blood that splattered out. At this moment, the green cocoon on Mr. Chang's head had already transformed into a giant eye that was tightly shut. Although it didn't open, Colin had a feeling that something extremely terrifying would happen the moment it opened. Colin hurriedly controlled the blood thrall to swing its sword at Mr. Chang's neck. At this moment, Mr. Chang's right arm had been cut off, and his left arm was raised high above his head, as if supporting the giant eye. It seemed that his spell wasn't complete yet. Facing the long sword that swung at him again, a hint of despair appeared in Mr. Chang's eyes. However, the longsword stopped at the last moment. That was because Colin suddenly remembered what Mr. Chang had shouted in the common language earlier. The Duke of St. Hilda? Judgment? That was why he hesitated. Asterisk boom. Asterisk another bolt of lightning flashed, and Colin's vision turned white once again. In that instant, it was as if he had completely lost contact with the blood thrall. When he could see the situation in Fallen Eagle City clearly again, Colin was shocked to discover that the giant green eye above Mr. Chang's head had already disappeared, and he didn't know where it had gone. Ha 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 ha. Mr. Chang looked up at the sky and finally laughed wildly. He then turned his head to look at the blood thrall that Colin was controlling. A trace of doubt flashed in his eyes, but he didn't stop chanting at all. Asterisk boom. Asterisk Colin only saw a flash of fire in front of his eyes, and then he was completely enveloped by darkness. Colin, what's wrong? When he came back to his senses, he saw Vera looking at him with a worried expression. I'm fine. Colin smiled as he patted his beloved wife's hand. He then tried to contact the blood thrall in Fallen Eagle City, but he didn't get any response. It seemed that Mr. Chang had killed it. However, he didn't regret it. Instead, he immediately looked for the Duke of St. Hilda in the banquet hall. Almost at the same time, the Duke of St. Hilda also looked at Colin and said with a smile, It's getting late. Shouldn't we announce the end of the banquet, so that the two newlyweds can spend the night together? Everyone in the banquet hall burst into laughter and nodded in agreement. Colin also laughed and said, Your Excellency, please announce the end of the banquet. Okay. The Duke of St. Hilda nodded and said, Thank you all. Suddenly, the sound in the banquet hall disappeared. Everyone saw the Duke of St. Hilda's mouth opening and closing, but they couldn't hear anything. It was as if he had been dragged into another time and space by some mysterious force, and only an illusory projection was left in his original place. Colin's heart trembled, and he immediately held Vera's hand tightly. Then he felt a gaze above his head. It was a gaze that seemed to be projected from a higher level of life, and it had a terrifying power that made him shudder. Colin subconsciously looked up at the sky. Although there were layers of obstacles, he could still see the familiar huge green eye, which was suspended above the red fortress at this time. In the next moment, the green eye opened. Colin's vision was once again white, and he couldn't see anything. At this moment his vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch had all disappeared. It was as if he had also been banished to a pale and empty space, and he was completely disconnected from the world. It felt as if only a moment had passed, but it also felt as if thousands of years had passed. Colin finally felt Vera's warmth again, and he could smell the familiar fragrance in his nose. He greedily took a deep breath, and then looked at the Duke of St. Hilda with a lingering fear. Colin, what happened just now? Vera hugged Colin's arm tightly, and she sounded panicked. Colin did not answer. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the Duke of St. Hilda. Vera turned her head in confusion, and then she saw a horrifying scene. Under the green light that descended from the sky, St. Hilda seemed to have been frozen in place for an instant. Then he fell to the ground with his head facing upwards. Bang! The green light dissipated, and the former king of the northern frontier shattered into pieces like a stone statue. There was no blood, no splashing of flesh and bones, but only gravel all over the ground. Ah! A sharp scream immediately sounded in the banquet hall. Chapter 223. A ray of white gradually appeared on the eastern horizon, signifying the beginning of a new day. But to the residents of Fallen Eagle City, the fiery purgatory of last night was the last day of their lives. The flames were gradually extinguished, but the suffocating heat had yet to dissipate. Even from afar, one could still feel the unbearable heat. In the bushes 3 kilometers away from Fallen Eagle City, there was a unique-looking carriage parked there. The coachman was taking a nap, as if he did not sleep well last night. There were dark circles under his eyes and a lingering fear between his brows, as if he was having a nightmare. The 2 old horses pulling the carriage were leisurely eating the grass on the ground, swinging their tails from time to drive away mosquitoes and flies. Dong dong. 2 knocks came from within the carriage, waking the coachman up. He hurriedly wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and respectfully asked, "Master, are we leaving?" "Yes, to the east." A majestic voice came from within the carriage, short and powerful. "Yes, master." The coachman immediately waved his whip, urging the old horses to head east. But before they could go far, the voice came from within the carriage again. "Stop." The coachman did not understand, but he still stopped the carriage. Just as he was scratching his head and preparing to ask what was going on, he realized that a figure wearing a silver mage robe had appeared beside the carriage. His face was covered by a large hood, and his appearance could not be seen clearly, but the terrifying aura he emitted made the coachman tremble uncontrollably. At this moment, the man's voice came from within the carriage again. "Mark, go further away." The coachman felt as if he had been pardoned, and he quickly ran far away. Then, the curtain of the carriage opened, and a middle-aged man wearing a white mage robe walked out of the carriage. "Cusius, I did not expect this forbidden technique to be restored by you." The silver-robed mage opened his mouth. His tone was both surprised and fearful, but more than that, it was filled with deep worry. "Lord Ernest, I did not expect to alarm you." The white-robed mage Cusius who walked out of the carriage bowed slightly and saluted. Then he shook his head and said, "However, we did not restore that forbidden technique. It can only be considered a clumsy imitation. Fortunately, it should have succeeded." Ernest sighed as if he was lamenting about something. Then his tone turned cold. "Do you know what it means if this taboo technique succeeds?" Cusius laughed, his face brimming with pride and exuberance. "It means that we, the mages, no longer have to be careful around the nobles of the empire. We no longer have to hide in Yevil and struggle at death's door. We no longer have to pay the price of our lives to gain the power to fight against the sanctum." Seeing that the other party did not speak, Penny leaned forward and drew circles on Count Almond's chest. She said with a coquettish look, "If you don't want that lowly illegitimate son of Vala to inherit the title, I can give birth to another child. How about it?" Count Aldman looked at Penny expressionlessly and said flatly, "Vala lowly? Haha, he is the son of Madame Suduo and I. What about Lawrence? He is just the illegitimate son of your incestuous relationship with your brother." Penny's expression changed slightly, but she suppressed her anger and said with a charming smile, "What do you know? Lawrence has the purest blood of the house of St. Theon flowing in his body." Count Aldman's gaze turned colder and colder. "Do you think that just because you have the word saint in your surname, you can treat others like dogs?" Penny's charming smile froze on her face, and her tone hardened. "Talos Aldman, don't fail to appreciate." Kacha. She was only halfway through her sentence when Count Aldman broke her neck. Count Aldman looked at the corpse of the woman in his arms and mocked. "So killing a descendant of a paladin family is no different from killing a mortal." Bang. Throwing the corpse to the ground, Count Aldman shouted outside the tent, "Men!" Not long after, a knight appeared in the tent and said respectfully, "Count, what are your orders?" "Go and capture Lawrence Aldman, dead or alive." "Yes." After the nobles finished their mourning, Bishop Peirce went forward and sprinkled holy water into the coffin as he recited a prayer. Finally, under the bishop's lead, everyone observed a moment of silence for the Duke of St. Hilda. The wake ceremony ended, but the Duke of St. Hilda couldn't be buried yet. After all, he was once the lord of the northern frontier. The Duke of St. Hilda's body couldn't be buried in a random cemetery in Icestone City like Charles, who didn't have a title. Instead, it had to be transported back to Winter City for a grand funeral. When the time came, the Empire's royal family would send people to participate. At the same time, the new dukes of the north would be decided. "Colin, I will stay to keep watch. You can go back." After everyone left, Vera turned to Colin and said softly. Her face was a little pale, and there was an unconcealable sadness in her eyes. But more than that, there was worry and confusion. Colin held her cold little hand and said gently, "I will stay to keep watch with you." "Okay." Vera smiled and hugged Colin's arm. She leaned her head on his shoulder and let out a long sigh of relief. After Bishop Peirce closed the door of the hall, only Colin and Vera were left in the hall. The cold moonlight shone through the glass on the marble floor, and it blended with the brilliance of the magic crystal chandelier, forming a strange pattern. A gentle breeze came in from nowhere, and it brought the tranquility of the spring night into the hall. Colin. Vera suddenly opened her mouth, and her voice seemed to come from the distant starry sky. It was deep and ethereal. What's wrong? Colin turned his head and kissed Vera's hair. Do you think I should hate him? What do you think? Colin did not give an answer because he knew that what Vera needed at this time was not an answer, but a confession. No matter how bad the Duke of St. Hilda's behavior was, after all, he had raised Vera for 20 years. This was something that could not be refuted. What's more, he had given Vera something that she needed the most, an identity. Colin did not know which beautiful woman Marquis Garcia had given birth to Vera. But if the Duke had not adopted her, she would have been a despised, illegitimate daughter. I don't know, Vera said softly. However, Colin did not hear a trace of hatred in her voice. If you don't know, then you should keep this question in your heart for the time being. Maybe one day, when you look back at this experience, you will have the answer. Colin decisively gave her a bowl of chicken soup to soothe the girl's wounded heart. Vera thought about Colin's words, and her eyebrows relaxed a lot. I understand. Thank you, Colin. She was so easy to coax. Colin smiled and patted Vera's arm, indicating that she should not think too much about it. The hall fell into silence again. Colin began to study the lines on the Duke of St. Hilda's body out of boredom. It seemed as though there were some secrets hidden in them. However, not long after, Vera opened her mouth again and asked, Colin, what do you think killed my father? I guess it should be some kind of magic. However, if it can kill a paladin, I am afraid that it must be a forbidden spell. At this point, Colin suddenly recalled the scene in Fallen Eagle City that he had seen through the eyes of the blood thrall. Colin could not help but feel a chill down his spine when he saw the terrible scene of fire burning the city. I guess it is also a forbidden spell. Vera nodded. Moreover, it is very similar to a forbidden spell that I have seen before. Oh, Colin suddenly became alert. He suddenly remembered that his wife was also a mage. Maybe she would know some useful information. Therefore he asked, Do you know about this forbidden spell? Vera nodded and then shook her head. I have seen a similar forbidden spell in my teacher's library. However, it is impossible to release that forbidden spell now, because one of the most important casting materials can no longer be found. Oh, what kind of forbidden spell is it? The Eyes of Petrification. The Eyes of Petrification. Colin looked at the Duke of St. Hilda, who had turned into a stone statue in the coffin. Yes. However, this forbidden spell is not the same as the Eyes of Petrification. I remember that the Eyes of Petrification is a forbidden spell that uses the spellcaster's eyes as a medium to release the spell. Everyone who looks directly into the spellcaster's eyes will turn into stone. However, there were no suspicious spellcasters in the Red Fort on the day that my father was affected by the forbidden spell. Moreover, I also looked up and saw the mysterious green eyes in the sky. Therefore, although the two spells are similar, they are definitely not the same forbidden spell. I guess it is a new spell that is modified from the Eyes of Petrification. Colin touched his chin. He then noticed an important piece of information that Vera had told him. You said that you saw the Eyes of Petrification in your teacher's library? Yes. Who is your teacher? He is the deputy chairman of the Yevil Mage Council, Master Cusius. Cusius? Of course, Colin had never heard of this name before. He knew almost nothing about Yevil, a city of mages. Then do you know Mr. Kong? Colin said the name of the real spellcaster. Yes, I have met him a few times in Yevil. His origin is very mysterious. It seems that he has a very good relationship with my teacher, and they often exchange their research experiences together. Colin looked at Vera, who had a confused expression on her face, and said, Actually, Mr. Kong is a descendant of the St. Thean family. St. Thean family? Vera was really surprised. Yes, and I suspect that Mr. Kong is the one who killed the Duke of St. Hilda. Vera frowned. Then, Do you think that Mr. Kong developed the forbidden spell that killed my father based on the eyes of petrification in my teacher's library? It is very possible. Vera pondered for a moment before she said, "Then, I will write a letter to my teacher and ask him about this matter when I go back." Well, it would be best if you ask him about the conditions for casting the forbidden spell, the price that needs to be paid, and whether there is any way to break the spell. Colin was a little worried that he would become the target of this forbidden spell one day. This forbidden spell was too terrifying. It could even petrify a paladin. He felt that if he became the target of this forbidden spell, even the characteristics of the Blood Clan would not be able to save him. Okay. Chapter 226. The first rays of the morning sun appeared above Ice Stone City earlier than usual, shrouding the city that had just experienced great joy and great sorrow. Perhaps the sun also knew that today was a special day, and wanted to let the two of them, who had not slept the entire night, finish their vigil earlier. The golden sunlight shone on the dome of the church, dyeing it with a layer of gorgeous halo. The side door of the church opened, and Colin walked out holding Vera's hand. Colin did not sleep the entire night, but Vera was so sleepy that she could not even open her eyes. In the crisp sound of horse hooves, Nightleg had personally driven the carriage in front of Colin. However, Colin did not get into the carriage immediately. This was because he had already seen another figure standing outside the church. It was Scholar Dawn. Obviously, Scholar Dawn did not wake up so early to pray for the Duke of St. Hilda. Instead, he was waiting for Colin. "You can go back and rest first," Colin said as he walked Vera to the carriage. He then walked towards Scholar Dawn. "Good morning, Sir Viscounts." "Good morning, Scholar Dawn." Colin had been standing for the entire night, and he was a little tired now. He turned around and walked into the church and sat down on the wooden chair at the back. Scholar Dawn also followed him into the church and stood behind Colin. Colin did not invite Scholar Dawn to sit down. Instead, he leaned against the back of the chair and closed his eyes. He then asked casually, "Scholar Dawn, why are you looking for me in such a hurry?" "Sir Viscounts, I want to remind you that the Angeli family is in danger." Colin did not even open his eyes when he heard Scholar Dawn's words. He was still in a lazy posture. Colin had seen Scholar Dawn's tricks many times in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms in his previous life. When the strategists of the Three Kingdoms wanted to persuade someone, they would first scare the target with words of alarm. Then, when the target panicked, they could use their glib tongue to make the target dizzy. In the end, the strategists would be led by the nose. It was the same as when the fortune-telling Taoist said, "Benefactor, I see that your glabella is turning black. There will be a disaster in the near future. Why is the Angeli family in danger?" When Scholar Dwayne saw Colin's expression, he knew that Colin wasn't a lord that could be easily fooled. He hastily raised his spirits and said, "With the death of the Duke St. Hilda, the most important pillar of the northern frontier has collapsed. In the current situation, I'm afraid that the Golden Lion Legion can't hold the fort alone. If you don't act immediately, I'm afraid that the House of St. Theon will become the new ruler of the northern frontier." Colin's eyes were still closed as he said faintly, "Why do I feel that you are trying to say that the House of St. Hilda is in danger?" "Lord Viscounts, since you have already married Miss Vera, the Angeli family and the House of St. Hilda are one. If the House of St. Theon becomes the ruler of the northern frontier, how can they tolerate you?" "Well, that makes sense." Colin finally nodded. "Then what do you think I should do?" Scholar Dwayne said without hesitation. "In the current situation, your best strategy is only one word: defense." "Defend?" Colin frowned. "Yes. With the death of the Duke St. Hilda, the people of the northern frontier are in chaos. The Golden Lion Legion alone won't be able to stabilize the situation in the entire northern frontier. Therefore, our only choice now is to defend Winter Castle first before making any other plans. Therefore, the Golden Lion Legion must retreat. I am not qualified to order the Golden Lion Legion to retreat to Winter Castle. But Miss Vera is qualified to do so. Are you sure? Vera is not the Marquis of the Eastern region. Isn't there still a Joyce in front of her?" Scholar Dwayne smiled before he said, "Lord Viscounts, You may not know this, but the Duke St. Hilda did not confer Joyce the title of Marquess of the Eastern Region when he was alive. Colin finally opened his eyes. He stared at Scholar Dwayne and said, "But Joyce is indeed ahead of Vera in the line of succession." The smile on Scholar Dwayne's face did not change at all as he said, "But Joyce is only a 10-year-old child after all. Don't you think it is a little inappropriate for him to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North?" Colin rolled his eyes before he continued asking, "So, do you support Vera to become the Dukes of the North?" The smile on Scholar Dwayne's face disappeared as he nodded solemnly. "Yes." Colin finally showed a sincere smile before he patted the chair beside him and said, "Have a seat." Scholar Dwayne did not stand on ceremony and sat down. At this time, the two of them finally had the foundation to cooperate. Colin's tone also softened a lot as he said, "Are you sure that the Golden Lion Legion will listen to Vera's orders? You should know that she is not the Dukes of the North now. Lord Viscounts, as long as Miss Vera appears in the camp of the Golden Lion Legion, I am confident that I can persuade Knight Nelson to retreat to Winter Castle." Knight Nelson was the commander of the Golden Lion Legion. He was also a knight of the House of St. Hilda, and he only obeyed the orders of the Duke. Colin stared into Scholar Dwayne's eyes, and when he saw the confident look on Scholar Dwayne's face, he believed his words for the time being. "What will happen after we retreat to Winter Castle? Winter Castle is indeed easy to defend and difficult to attack, but we can't just stay in the city forever. Will the other large territories on the northern frontier be given to the St. Thean family? Of course not." Scholar Dwayne continued to analyze the situation. "Lord Viscounts, this time, the St. Thean family is mainly relying on 3 forces to conquer the northern frontier: the Trolls, the Dwarves, and the Oman family. The Trolls have already been eliminated by you in advance, so you don't have to worry about them anymore. As for the Oman family, you don't have to worry too much either. This is because Earl Oman has the same cautious style as the Oman family. To put it bluntly, he lacks courage. During the chaos on the northern frontier last year, I have already seen through this person. He is just a fence-sitter who only cares about himself. He will side with whichever side is stronger. You don't have to worry about him working for the St. Thean family. As for the Dwarves, they are mainly divided into 2 factions, the Dawson family and the Menham family. They are the most difficult faction to deal with, especially now that the Menham family's army has entered the northern frontier. They will soon join forces with the Dawson family and form a pincer attack on the Golden Lion Legion. This is the main reason why I advise you to withdraw the Golden Lion Legion from Winter Castle. However, the ultimate goal of the Dawson family and the Menham family is to establish the Dwarven Kingdom and not to help the St. Thean family control the northern frontier. Therefore, if we have no choice, we can cede a portion of the northern frontier territory and allow the dwarves to establish a kingdom. This way, they won't continue to fight with us for the sake of the St. Thean family. Lord Viscounts, now you understand. The reason why I advise you to be on the defensive is because the St. Thean family has a fatal flaw. They don't have a direct army. Therefore, once the war reaches a stalemate, there is a possibility that the rebel forces they have roped in will be divided and drawn over. As long as these forces fall apart one after another, the chaos in the northern region will naturally come to an end. Indeed, the St. Thean family had been in exile for so many years. They didn't have any territory, and naturally couldn't afford to raise their own army. Therefore, Mr. Fong could only rely on his connections to rope in the various forces to help him deal with the House of St. Hilda. However, this weakness always existed. If the death of the Duke of St. Hilda was the last straw that broke the camel's back, then everything would be fine. However, if the northern frontier didn't completely lose the ability to resist, then when the situation was in a stalemate, the St. Thean family's biggest weakness would become a fatal flaw. Therefore, the most important thing for the northern frontier was to stabilize the situation. Listening to Scholar Dwayne's detailed analysis, Colin didn't show it on the surface, but in his heart he sighed. The talents of the White Tower Academy were indeed capable. It was no wonder that he could become the Duke of St. Hilda's most relied-on think tank. Chapter 227. In the dining room of the Red Castle. Colin was sitting at the main seat on the long table made of red paulownia wood while Scholar Dwayne was sitting beside him. The half-elf maid Kathy quickly served up a sumptuous breakfast. There was lemon-roasted chicken, bacon-fried eggs, oatmeal, buttered bread, and of course Colin's exclusive deer blood wine. As for Scholar Dwayne, he drank milk. After staying up all night, Colin's appetite was very good at this time. It did not take long for him to stuff all the food in front of him into his stomach. Scholar Dwayne's eating posture was very elegant, and it was obvious that he had undergone special training. However, his eating speed was not slow either. He finished his meal almost at the same time as Colin. After wiping his mouth, Colin asked Kathy to pour 2 cups of coffee. He then asked with a smile, "Scholar Dwayne, I have always had a question. Why are you willing to support Vera to become the Dukes of the North? Don't use the excuse that Joyce is too young to fool me." Indeed, a young monarch was a good opportunity for every powerful official to show off their skills. Scholar Dwayne took a sip of coffee before he said, "Sir Viscounts, the reason why I chose to support Miss Vera is because of you." "Me?" Colin was obviously stunned. "Yes." Scholar Dwayne looked straight into Colin's eyes with a calm expression on his face. "It is because I think that only you can turn the tide and quell the rebellion in the northern frontier." Scholar Dwayne could obviously see that Colin was undoubtedly the leader in the relationship between Colin and Vera. Therefore, once Vera became the Dukes of the North, the one who would truly control the northern frontier would be Colin. "Do you think so highly of me?" Colin was slightly proud. After all, everyone liked to be praised. "Of course. You are a military genius who was chosen by Marquis Garcia. You have also defeated 2 strong enemies in Silvermoon City and Troll City. You have proven your military ability. It can be said that after Marquis Garcia, you are the best commander in the northern frontier. Moreover, you are quite talented in politics. No matter if it was winning the final victory in Silvermoon City's complicated game of chess, or stabilizing Icestone City in the midst of the chaos on the northern frontier. They all proved your outstanding political talent. In addition, I recently discovered the points system that you use to manage the slaves. It can be said to be a genius creation. Therefore, I firmly believe that the northern frontier will be revitalized under your governance." Colin was a little surprised. Obviously, he did not expect Scholar Dwayne to have studied him so deeply. Moreover, Scholar Dwayne could tell at a glance that the point system he had created was the key to motivating the slaves. However, he did not want to appear too complacent. "However, it is difficult to make them like the same person at the same time. But it is easy to make them hate the same person at the same time." "Oh, what do you mean?" "Lord Viscounts, do you know Baron Heidegger?" "Of course I know him. After all, he is the Prime Minister of the Empire," Colin said lightly. In fact, he felt a little guilty. After all, this was all he knew about Baron Heidegger. Scholar Dwayne did not know if he could see Colin's embarrassment, so he continued to explain in detail. Baron Heidegger was born in a civilian family. He was lucky enough to have the opportunity to study at the White Tower Academy. After graduation, he has been serving the San Lorenzo family. Although he was born in a humble family, Baron Heidegger was very talented. It only took him 13 years to become the Prime Minister of the Empire from a civilian. He has been in this position for more than 40 years. It can be said that he is the most irreplaceable old minister in the Empire. When Emperor Reinhardt first ascended the throne, he tried to give Baron Heidegger a title to show his favor and to win him over. However, this decision was strongly opposed by the Senate. The reason was very simple. Although Heidegger was the Prime Minister of the Empire, he was still a civilian. According to the aristocratic law, he could not be given a title directly. The Senate hoped that Emperor Reinhardt would choose a noble's daughter to marry Heidegger. They also promised that their descendants could receive a title. However, the Prime Minister would be nearly 70 years old at that time. Even if he married a noble, how could he have children? Moreover, Heidegger had never married in his life. It was said that he was not fond of women. At this point, Scholar Dwayne's expression was a little strange. Seeing this, Colin's imagination immediately ran wild about the Prime Minister's sexual orientation. In short, the Emperor and the Senate fell out over the matter of Heidegger being given a title. In the end, after a fierce struggle and a series of concessions, the Senate reluctantly agreed. However, the Emperor also made a great compromise. The Prime Minister only received the lowest title of Baron. Moreover, this title was lifelong and could not be inherited. It was also a title without any territory. Although there were various restrictions, Heidegger was still the first civilian to be given a title. This was a great honor for him. Unfortunately, the resistance shown by the Senate during this process, and the various restrictions placed on the title of Baron angered the arrogant Heidegger. He even publicly declared that, "I would rather be a free civilian than a noble with my hands and feet tied." Although Heidegger finally accepted the title under the Emperor's persuasion, he had already formed a grudge with the Senate. After that, the Prime Minister took advantage of his position to pass several bills that limited the power of the Senate. Chapter 228. Tap, tap, tap. Kathy tiptoed into the dining room and refilled the glasses of the two people who were talking. Then she tiptoed away. After the door was closed again, Scholar Duane said, "Sir Viscounts, between Miss Vera and Mr. Joyce, Emperor Reinhardt would definitely side with Miss Vera." "Oh, why?" Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly asked. Scholar Duane took a sip of his coffee before he replied calmly, "Sir Viscounts, do you know why the San Lorenzo family allowed the St. Thean family to usurp the northern frontier this time? They even secretly ordered the Menham family to send troops to attack the Golden Lion Legion? I think they want to use this opportunity to divide the northern frontier," Colin said in an uncertain tone. "The Menham family and the Dawson family do want to establish a kingdom of dwarves, and this move will divide the northern frontier. However, do you really think that the San Lorenzo family would disregard their relationship with the House of St. Hilda and help the St. Thean family, who they have an old feud with, seize the northern frontier? The St. Thean family must have offered other conditions, right?" "Yes, I had guessed so before, but the death of the Duke immediately made me realize what the St. Thean family's condition was." "What is it?" Colin's curiosity was immediately piqued. Scholar Duane did not answer immediately. Instead he asked, "Sir Viscounts, what do you think killed the Duke?" "It should be some kind of forbidden spell." "I think so too. Moreover, I think that this forbidden spell should be the work of Mr. Fong from the St. Thean family. I just don't know what kind of price he paid for it." When he heard this, Colin could not help but think of the burning Eagle City and Mr. Fong, who was surrounded by green smoke. He wanted to tell Duane about Fallen Eagle City, but the words stopped at the tip of his tongue. Only a day had passed since the incident at Fallen Eagle City. With the speed of communication in this world, Colin could not have received the news so quickly. In order to not reveal his greatest secret, Colin could not let anyone know that he was aware of the situation in Fallen Eagle City. He would have to wait a few days before he could reveal anything. "Lord Viscounts, do you know Prince Rhy?" Scholar Duane asked again, not knowing what Colin was thinking. "Yes, I know. He's the only living holy knight of the royal family." Yes, it was true that Prince Lacy was a holy knight, but he was from a side branch of the San Lorenzo family. Before he had advanced to the saint level, he had not been valued. He had even suffered a lot because of the fight over cultivation resources. As a result, after becoming a paladin, this person became arrogant and domineering. He was extremely greedy for power and profit, and he was not very respectful to the direct descendants of San Lorenzo. Therefore, Emperor Reinhardt relied heavily on this person, but he was also afraid of him. I feel that the latter was more likely. However, with Prince Rhy's strength, he was destined to be undefeatable. Even Emperor Reinhardt could only swallow his anger in front of him. Therefore, when I saw the Duke of St. Hilda die under an unknown forbidden spell, I understood what the St. Thean family wanted in exchange for the Emperor's support. Colin also understood at this time. "You mean, the St. Thean family used a forbidden spell that could kill a holy knight in exchange for Emperor Reinhardt's support?" Scholar Duane nodded. "Yes, Emperor Reinhardt was afraid of Prince Rhy's strength. If the St. Thean family gave him a forbidden spell that could kill a holy knight, Emperor Reinhardt would definitely be tempted." Colin nodded involuntarily, agreeing with this guess. However, he then wondered, what does this have to do with Emperor Reinhardt supporting Vera to become the Dukes of the North? Scholar Dwayne smiled and continued to explain. I think that Emperor Reinhardt did not want to kill Prince Rhy. The House of San Lorenzo needed such a banner, and they also needed a paladin to intimidate everyone. However, the Emperor did not want this sword to hurt him, so he needed something that could keep the paladin in check. That was the forbidden spell of the House of San Thean. However, in order to release this forbidden spell, Emperor Reinhardt needed the help of a mage. However, the hatred between the nobles of the empire and the mage parliament was too deep. Therefore, Emperor Reinhardt did not dare to rope in Yule. Therefore, he needed a mage to partner. Colin immediately understood when he heard this. Mr. Fa was such a partner, but Vera could also be his partner. She was a descendant of the Holy Knight family and a mage. She was even more suitable than Mr. Fa to be Emperor Reinhardt's partner. Therefore, if he had to choose between Joyce and Vera to become the Dukes of the North, Vera would definitely be Emperor Reinhardt's first choice. Colin was excited. He was originally worried that Vera would have a hard time inheriting the position of the Dukes of the North. However, after listening to Scholar Dwayne's analysis, he suddenly realized something. It turned out that Vera had an absolute chance of winning compared to Joyce. As he thought of this, Colin looked at Scholar Dwayne with a fiery gaze. Scholar Dwayne was indeed a rare talent. He had wisdom, connections, and knew the nobles of the empire like the back of his hand. If he could get Scholar Dwayne's help, Colin would definitely become even more powerful. Although he wanted to recruit Scholar Dwayne, Colin was not in a hurry. Scholar Dwayne was a retainer of the House of St. Hilda. As long as Vera successfully inherited the position of the Dukes, he would naturally become Colin's support. Of course, all of this was based on the premise that the St. Thean family was defeated. If Mr. Dwayne became the Dukes of the North, then Vera and Joyce would not be able to compete anymore. However, according to Scholar Dwayne's previous analysis, as long as the Golden Lion Legion did not lose Winter City, the war would be in a stalemate. Then, they would divide the vassal forces of the St. Thean family, and the chaos on the northern frontier would naturally subside. Very good, Scholar Dwayne. After I reorganize the army, I will personally escort Vera to the Golden Lion Legion's camp as soon as possible, and persuade them to return to Winter City. When Scholar Dwayne heard this, he smiled happily and said, Lord Viscounts, you have made the wisest choice. However, the Menham family's army is approaching the Golden Lion Legion. You have to race against time and arrive at the camp before the enemy cuts off the Golden Lion Legion's escape route. All right, I will set off tomorrow morning. Yes. After that, the two of them chatted for a while before Scholar Dwayne got up and left. Colin was the only one left in the dining hall. He was drinking his cold coffee alone, and no one knew what he was thinking. After a while, Kathy came in to pack up and asked, Master, do you need anything else? Colin shook his head and said, No, I am already full. Ask Eamon to come and see me. Yes. Not long after, the butler Eamon hurried into the dining hall. Master, are you looking for me? Yes. I remember that Scholar Dwayne is not a commoner, right? What is his surname? Master, Scholar Dwayne's full name is Dwayne White. White. Colin was confused again. Is this a family from the northern frontier? Fortunately, Eamon had some understanding of this family and quickly explained, Master, the White family is a vassal of the imperial family. Their title is Viscounts, and their territory is in the Flaming Flame territory. However, Scholar Dwayne is not the eldest son of the family, and has not inherited the title. A vassal of the imperial family? Colin's eyes flashed. He was greatly surprised. A scholar from a vassal of the imperial family was regarded as a trusted retainer by the Duke of St. Hilda. There must be a reason for this. After a while, he spoke again and ordered, Send someone to investigate this White family. I need more detailed information. Yes, Master. Also, inform Knight Roger to gather 1,000 black cavalry soldiers. They will set off with me tomorrow morning. Yes. Chapter 229. The sunset glow in the sky heralded another fine day. Clop, clop, clop. Amidst the rapid sound of hooves, a rider galloped towards the north. The rider was in a sorry state, his hair fluttering in the wind. His originally luxurious clothes were tattered in several places, and he was covered in blood. It was obvious that he had just experienced a great battle. This was Viscount Lawrence, who had escaped from the Oman family's camp. He held a blood-stained sword in his hand, but he had already used it as a whip. He kept slapping the horses but urging it to gallop forward. Behind him, there was a column of smoke rising. Dozens of figures galloping on horseback were following closely behind him, waving their swords and bows. This chase had gone on for an entire day, and Viscount Lawrence felt that he was reaching his limit. But he did not dare to stop, because from the previous few short exchanges, he could clearly feel that the pursuers really wanted to kill him. His mother was most likely dead. In fact, Count Oman should already know that he wasn't his biological son. Viscount Lawrence's heart was filled with deep regret. If he had known this, he would not have acted on his own and tried to assassinate Count Oman with his mother. He should have waited for his father to arrange it. But then, he shook his head fiercely, throwing this thought out of his mind. He could not wait for his father to arrange everything. Viscount Lawrence knew that his real father, Mr. Oman, had more than one son. Although those were all illegitimate children, he was not his father's son. Furthermore, even if his father were to become the new Duke of the Northern region, he would never be able to marry his own sister Penny. Incest was a taboo love in this world, and was not recognized by the world. Therefore, if those illegitimate children had a slim chance of becoming official, then Lawrence was destined to never become the son of the first wife. Of course, Lawrence knew that his father and mother had agreed that he would become Mr. Oman's adopted son, and change his surname to St. Sean. But what if Mr. Oman had a son of his own? Mr. Oman had not married yet. But what about after he became the Dukes of the North? Could it be that he would never marry? This sense of danger made Lawrence and Penny decide to take the risk of assassinating Earl Oman, and then take control of the Oman family's army. In this way, with an army in his hands, he would have a bargaining chip. Thus, the mother and son gained some confidence. But who would have thought I screwed up? All sorts of complicated emotions churned in Lawrence's heart. He was so distracted that he didn't notice that the warhorse beneath him was about to die. White foam was already coming out of the horse's mouth. It was obvious that it could collapse at any time. In the blink of an eye, another 6 to 7 miles had passed. Viscount Lawrence's warhorse was already sweating profusely. Traces of blood seeped out of the white foam at the corners of its mouth. Sure enough, in the next second, the warhorse staggered and rolled on the ground. The crisp sound of bones breaking was particularly ear-piercing. Viscount Lawrence was immediately flung away, his heart filled with shock. Fortunately, as a third-grade knight, his physical fitness was far superior to that of an ordinary person. While he was in the air, he forcefully curled his body into a ball. When he landed, he rolled a few times, and then he leaped up vigorously. Viscount Lawrence panted a few times. Looking at the cavalry chasing behind him, a feeling of despair rose in his heart. But very quickly, he shook his head and suppressed these emotions. A ferocious look appeared in his eyes. Viscount Lawrence gripped his sword with both hands, and bent his knees slightly, preparing for battle. Since he had failed, he could only bear the consequences. Viscount Lawrence threw away all useless emotions, and focused on the approaching cavalry. Ta-ta-ta! The sound of horse hooves became heavier and heavier, and the ground shook more and more violently. Come! The house of St. Thean will never yield! Lawrence roared, his ferocious expression like a tiger in a desperate situation. The cavalry's faces could be seen clearly. They all raised the swords in their hands. The cold glint of their swords was like a forest of steel as they charged towards Lawrence. He was getting closer and closer. Lawrence took a deep breath and prepared for the impending collision. Time seemed to slow down, and the air seemed to be scorching hot. No, it wasn't as if. The air was really hot. In a short moment, Lawrence felt a wave of heat coming towards him, as if he was facing a large furnace. Boom! Just as he was puzzled, a wall of fire suddenly stood in front of him. The air was so hot that it seemed to be suffocating. Nay, nay, the pursuers were terrified. They frantically tried to control their horses, trying to stop in front of the wall of fire. However, how could the charging horses stop in such a short time? Like moths to a flame, most of the pursuers rushed into the wall of fire one after another due to inertia. The raging flames seemed to have a strange magic, turning them into ashes in an instant. The pursuers behind did not have time to figure out what was happening. They all tried their best to turn their horses around, and immediately ran back. However, before they could escape far, another huge fireball fell from the sky, completely engulfing the remaining pursuers. The flowing flames instantly covered the grass within a few hundred meters. When the fire subsided, only a large patch of scorched earth and what looked like ashes could be seen. As the gentle night breeze blew, the ashes that danced in the air were like specks of starlight. There was a strange and cruel beauty to it. Lawrence looked at everything in front of him in a daze, as if he had not recovered from the huge change. After a long while, he finally put away his long sword, his face revealing a smile of someone who had survived a disaster. "Father, is that you?" Lawrence looked around and shouted loudly. Soon, he found an inconspicuous figure not far behind him. "Father!" Lawrence hurriedly ran over. "Why are they chasing you?" Mr. Chong's face was covered by the hood of his mage robe. His expression could not be seen. Lawrence was at a loss for words. After hesitating for a moment, he told Mr. Chong everything that he and his mother had done. After Mr. Chong heard this, he did not move for a long time. The sun gradually set, leaving only a bit of afterglow to illuminate the world. The footsteps of darkness were unstoppable, about to rule this land. The night breeze was slightly cold, but Lawrence's heart was even colder. Mr. Chong's silence was slowly eroding his faith, causing him to slide into the abyss of despair. But just as the darkness was about to completely engulf Lawrence, a ray of light suddenly illuminated his world. He heard Mr. Chong say, "I understand." His tone was extremely calm, as if he did not care about the trouble that Lawrence had caused. Lawrence's heart was uneasy as he asked tentatively, "Father, then what should we do now?" Mr. Chong suddenly raised his head, the wide hood slipping back to reveal his face. What kind of face was that? The left side of his face had completely turned into a strange greenish-gray color. The twisted blood vessels were like earthworms, constantly wriggling under the skin. What was even more terrifying was his left eye. There was no longer an eyeball there, only a hole. A bottomless hole that seemed to suck in one's soul with just a glance. Lawrence was so frightened that he took 3 steps back, but he immediately realized that his actions were inappropriate and hurriedly took 3 steps forward. Suppressing the fear in his heart and the trembling of his body, he asked, "Father, are you all right? Follow me." Mr. Chong's tone was cold. After saying this, he didn't answer Lawrence's question. Instead, he stood up silently and walked forward. Lawrence did not dare to ask any more questions and hurriedly followed. The last ray of sunlight disappeared into the horizon, and endless darkness completely enveloped the land. Chapter 230. The warm morning light shone through the treetops, leaving behind mottled shadows on the grass. Lawrence woke up amidst the crisp chirping of birds. After getting up from the ground, he immediately looked around. Only when he saw the thin figure shrouded in mage robes not far away did he relax. Lawrence walked over and said softly, "Good morning, Father." Mr. Chong did not turn around, only focusing on writing something down. Lawrence felt a little awkward, but he did not dare to disturb him too much. He quietly retreated, preparing to find some prey for breakfast. In the morning, the air in the forest was especially fresh, and there was still a bit of dew on the leaves. Lawrence found the tracks left behind by a few wild hares, and immediately chased after them. But before he could go far, he saw a flock of startled birds flapping their wings as they flew out of the forest. Someone was coming. Lawrence immediately broke into a run. When he saw Mr. Chong's figure again, he immediately shouted, "Father! Someone's coming. I'm afraid it's the Oman family's pursuing troops." Mr. Chong did not seem to hear the shouts behind him, continuing to write and draw on the parchment scroll. Lawrence ran to Mr. Chong and reminded him again, but Mr. Chong still did not move. This time, Lawrence was at a loss. Just as he did not know what to do, the surrounding bushes rustled and soon, a group of fully armed soldiers surrounded them. Lawrence held his sword with both hands, nervously looking around. Mr. Chong was still engrossed in writing, as if the outside world had nothing to do with him. The surrounding soldiers got into formation, but did not move forward. Just as Lawrence was puzzled, he saw a knight step out from the crowd. He dismounted and took off his helmet, revealing an expressionless face. It was Count Oman. Lawrence's heart skipped a beat, and he cursed inwardly. Count Oman's appearance meant that the army was nearby. This also meant that they would not be able to escape. Even if Mr. Chong was a powerful 6th-level mage, he would not be able to escape the encirclement of tens of thousands of soldiers. Under Lawrence's despairing gaze, Count Oman slowly walked towards them alone. Mr. Chong finally finished writing. He unhurriedly put away the parchment scroll and stood up. Coincidentally, Count Oman also walked up to them. Lawrence's sword-wielding hands couldn't help but tremble. He wanted to greet him, but he didn't know how to address Count Oman. Earl Oman did not even look at his former son. Instead, he said to Mr. Burr, "Is this how the House of St. Thean treats their allies?" Mr. Chong pointed at his left eye and said expressionlessly, "How can you not pay a price for killing a paladin? Eagle Fall City is your price, and I have also paid mine." Count Oman let out a cold laugh, saying disdainfully, "A left eye and a city. Mr. Khan, do you think such a price is fair?" "It's indeed unfair," Mr. Chong said calmly. "What other compensation do you want? You can tell me directly." "Compensation?" The mockery on Count Oman's face deepened. "I've already killed the stupid woman who wrote me a blank check. Don't forget, you're still not the lord of the northern frontier. So don't think of compensating me with something you don't have." Mr. Khan's eyes flashed when he heard the words "stupid woman." He seemed to understand what had happened to his sister Penny, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he asked calmly, "Then tell me what I have now. What do you want?" Count Oman's eyes were filled with brutality. He growled, "I want you to pay with your life for the 300,000 citizens of Eagle Fall City. Are you willing?" Mr. Khan shook his head calmly. "If you kill me now, it won't help the Oman family at all. Instead, you'll be cutting off your last hope." Count Oman didn't refute this time. He obviously agreed with Mr. Khan's point of view. He needed Mr. Khan alive. But the anger in Count Oman's eyes burned even brighter, as if it was about to burst out. Lawrence shrunk between the two like a quail, trying his best to reduce his presence. But obviously his efforts were in vain because he heard his own name. "All right then, let your son Lawrence pay with his life for Fallen Eagle City." "Okay." Hearing Count Oman's request, Mr. Khan agreed without hesitation. It was as if the person he wanted to kill wasn't his own son, but a pet dog he'd casually adopted. "What?" Lawrence stood there in a daze, as if he couldn't believe that his fate had been decided so easily. He couldn't help but tremble as he called out hoarsely, "F.A. father." Unfortunately, his biological father, Mr. Khan, ignored him. His nominal father, Count Oman, had already taken a step forward, grabbing his hair with one hand. "Father." Lawrence looked at Count Oman with pleading eyes. At this moment, he couldn't care less about who he should call father. As long as he could save his life, he would call him father. He could even call them both Swish. A silver light flashed, and Lawrence's head was chopped off. Blood spurted out and splattered all over Mr. Khan. Count Oman purposely raised Lawrence's head in front of Mr. Khan and said coldly, "This is only interest." Mr. Khan stared expressionlessly at Lawrence's head, not moving at all. Count Oman seemed to have finally vented his anger. Carrying the bleeding head, he swaggered off. When the surrounding soldiers had all dispersed, Mr. Khan took out the parchment scroll and continued to write and draw. Lawrence's headless corpse fell at his feet, and the flowing blood quickly dyed a large patch of grass red. The surrounding air suddenly froze, the temperature dropping by more than 10 degrees without warning, as if winter had once again enveloped the land. "You're not even going to collect your son's corpse?" The white-robed mage Cusius suddenly appeared beside Mr. Khan and mocked him. Mr. Khan raised his head and didn't answer the question. Instead, he looked at his friend's white hair and the uncontrollable cold air around him and frowned. How did you end up in such a sorry state? Wuxia sighed, a trace of fear flashing in his eyes. We met Ernest. Cough cough. Why do you think this old man wants to go against us? Can't he see that the things we've researched can truly allow the Mage Congress to rise to prominence? Mr. Khan sneered. He's just worried that his position will be challenged. Haha, that short-sighted old thing. Wuxia cursed, then asked suspiciously. But how did this old thing know about our plan? And he just happened to appear in Fallen Eagle City at this time? It should be Emperor Reinhardt who informed Ernest. Emperor Reinhardt? Why would he? Wuxia stopped in the middle of his sentence. This was because he had already guessed the reason for Emperor Reinhardt's actions. Clearly, Emperor Reinhardt was wary of Mr. Kuei, and was worried that Mr. Kuei would threaten him with this forbidden spell. Since he had already verified the feasibility of the forbidden spell, and obtained the casting scroll, it was naturally better for Mr. Kuei to die. If that's the case, I'm afraid the assassination against us has only just begun. Wuxia's face was gloomy. Mr. Khan shook his head. No, Reinhardt will only hint to Ernest or even Prince Rhy to make a move against us. He will not send people to kill us himself. You trust him that much? Or did he promise you something? Mr. Khan didn't answer Wuxia's question, and continued to focus on the parchment scroll in front of him. Wuxia saw this, and understood that Mr. Khan didn't want to talk about it. He could only helplessly scratch his head and change the topic. What about Erlomon? Are you going to let him humiliate you like this? Mr. Khan's hand that was holding the brush paused for a moment before he said softly, 2 heads of the descendants of the St. Thean family is enough for him to gain the trust of the house of St. Hilda. Wuxia thought for a moment, and seemed to understand Mr. Khan's meaning. He muttered, You destroyed Fallen Eagle City, and he killed your sister and your son. Yes, this will indeed make the house of St. Hilda think that you have broken off relations with him. However, under such circumstances, can you still continue to trust this person? Will Erlomon still continue to trust you? Mr. Khan shook his head. The word trust is too extravagant. I just think that Erlomon will make the choice that is most beneficial to him. And this choice would also be helpful to me. That is why I allowed him to take Penny and Lawrence's heads. What do you mean? Wuxia obviously couldn't follow Mr. Khan's train of thought. After the death of the Duke of St. Hilda, the 2 people most likely to inherit the title of Duke are Vera and Joyce. Erlomon will not support Vera, because he has a grudge against Viscount Angley. Therefore, he will definitely stand on Joyce's side. And one of my main targets is the Angeli family. Therefore, no matter how much Erlomon hates me, he will still be my natural ally. At this point, a helpless expression appeared on Mr. Khan's face. Originally, I had better arrangements for Erlomon, but now, because of the reckless actions of those 2 idiots, I can only do this. Wuxia laughed and suddenly said playfully, Speaking of which, Vera was my student in Yevil. Do you want me to help you? Mr. Khan's gaze paused, and he looked at Wuxia seriously for a long time until the other party felt uncomfortable. Finally he nodded. All right, you can give it a try. However, I have to remind you that Viscount Angley is not easy to deal with. Don't worry, I know what to do. Chapter 231. May in the northern frontier was the season of the year, when the rain was the heaviest. It was obviously noon, but the sky was already covered with dark clouds, and there was no sunlight at all. The surrounding environment was as dark as the night, and even the most inexperienced traveler knew that a storm was coming. Colin looked at the dark clouds above his head, and ordered Knight Roger, who was beside him. The rain is not going to be light. Ask the soldiers to set up camp here. We will continue to move forward after lunch. Yes, Sir Viscounts. As soon as Knight Roger left, Colin felt a slight chill on his forehead. The rain had already arrived. Colin dismounted from his horse and walked towards the carriage next to him. As soon as he climbed up the wooden stairs, the door of the car was opened. A beautiful face that was both angry and happy at the same time poked out and welcomed Colin into the car. As soon as the door was closed, Vera stretched out her white and round arms and hooked Colin's neck. She gave him a lingering kiss, and then carefully helped Colin take off his cloak and armor. She then squatted down and helped him take off his leather boots. Enjoying the gentleness of his newly married wife, Colin smiled and said, "The storm is coming. I am afraid that we will have to wait here for a while before we leave." "Well, okay." Vera nodded obediently. She suddenly thought of something, and her ears suddenly turned red. It was raining heavily outside the carriage, but it was warm and peaceful inside the carriage. Vera was only wearing a knee-length sleeveless silk nightgown. Her smooth and straight legs were exposed under the nightgown, and she was not wearing any shoes on her feet. She was stepping on the white cashmere carpet. Her golden hair was casually draped over her shoulders, revealing her white and slender neck. Because she was squatting down, her round buttocks were full and attractive. Vera blushed and raised her head, as if she could feel Colin's burning gaze. She stretched out her hand and swept her hair to the side, so that her chest could be seen clearly. Colin immediately reached out and held his wife's slender waist before he carried her to the soft bed at the back of the carriage. The wind was whistling, and the carriage was shaking slightly. Raindrops the size of beans hit the car window, covering the sound of ecstasy in the car. After a storm, the sky gradually cleared up. Colin pulled back a corner of the curtain and looked outside. Vera rested her delicate chin on Colin's shoulder and said in an extremely languid tone, "Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything." "Colin, are we leaving?" "Yes, we need to get to the Golden Lion Legion's encampment as soon as possible. With you by my side, how can it be hard for me?" Vera smiled before she kissed him again. After being intimate for a while, Colin walked out of the carriage. Knight Roger, who was standing guard not far away, immediately walked over and reported, "Sir Viscounts, the messenger of the Morrison family has found us. Would you like to meet him?" "Morrison family? All right, bring him here." The lords of this world had strict rules when they went out. This was not only to show their status, but also to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. If they wanted to pass through the territories of other lords, they would need to send a messenger in advance to inform the local lord of their identity, the number of people accompanying them, the destination, and other information. After the local lord received the message, he could make preparations to receive the distinguished guest in advance. However, Colin's trip was obviously not going to follow this procedure. Otherwise, the Golden Lion Legion would have already been attacked by the dwarf army from both sides by the time he arrived at the Rapids River. What's more, the soldiers accompanying him this time were obviously beyond the standard of an ordinary lord. Strictly speaking, it was an expedition. It was reasonable to say that such a troop movement must be approved by the lord of the northern frontier, before the other lords along the way would let them go. However, under the current situation, the northern frontier was already a mess. The dukes of the north were already dead. Therefore, Colin did not care about this rule, and did not inform the local lords along the way. Although their whereabouts would be discovered by the patrolling sentries, in the face of the Black Cavalry's flag, these sentries did not dare to step forward to stop them. Of course, the lords along the way who received the news would definitely not invite an uninvited guest like Colin into the castle. Therefore, this Count Morrison was the first lord to send an invitation to Colin. "Respected Viscounts, welcome to the Morrison domain. The Count has ordered me to come and invite you and your wife to the Phoenix Butterfly Castle as guests." After the messenger of the Morrison family finished speaking, he respectfully handed over an invitation. Colin took it and glanced at it. He was a little hesitant. He did not want to waste time along the way, but facing the Morrison family who took the initiative to invite him, he felt that it was inappropriate to directly refuse. First of all, this was a count's family, and had enough value to win them over. Secondly, the current Count Morrison had dealt with Colin before, and Colin had a good impression of him. Moreover, the Morrison family was a loyal follower of the House of St. Hilda. Perhaps he could gain a powerful ally in this trip to the Phoenix Butterfly Castle. Moreover, after this storm, the ground was slippery, and the cavalry could not advance at full speed. It would be better to go to the Phoenix Butterfly Castle to rest for the night, and set off the next day. Maybe they think that a noble bloodline can be artificially cultivated like a precious tulip. Colin looked at the smile on Scholar Dwayne's face, and suddenly became interested. What kind of secret was hidden in the Paladin bloodline? And what exactly had the Morrison family researched? While they were talking, Floral City was already in front of them. Earl Morrison, who was dressed in splendid clothes, was standing in front of the city gate. When he saw Colin and the others, he immediately stepped forward and greeted them. Honorable Viscount Angley, Madam Viscounts, welcome to Floral City. Chapter 232. Dang, dang, dang. The dull sound of the funeral bell came from the church in the center of Floral City. In the church, the Duke of St. Hilda's coffin was opened again for the members of the Morrison family to mourn for him. When the ceremony was over, everyone left the church with a heavy heart. The dead were gone, but the living had to move on. Colin and Vera calmed down and went to the Butterfly Castle under the lead of Count Morrison. The castle of the Morrison family was located in the southeast corner of Floral City, covering an area of more than 800 acres. The main body was made of solid granite, and the outer wall was made of precious white glazed rock. Looking from afar, it looked like a white jade castle. There were all kinds of gorgeous courtyards and rows of buildings in the castle. Of course, there was also the signature of the Morrison family, the tulips. From the most common white, red, yellow, to the rarest and most precious black tulips, they could be found here. The multicolored tulips decorated the Phoenix Butterfly Castle beautifully, giving it a lively scene. Colin couldn't help but take a deep breath, and his nose was immediately filled with the fresh and elegant fragrance of the flowers. Ha! Why is there a trace of blood? Colin frowned and turned to look at Vera. However, she didn't seem to notice anything unusual, and she was still intoxicated by the sea of flowers. Knight Roger, who was behind him, also didn't have any reaction, and Count Morrison was still enthusiastically introducing the relevant information about the tulips. Colin sniffed carefully again, and found that it was not an illusion just now, and the castle was indeed filled with a faint smell of blood. This smell may be hidden from others, but it couldn't escape the nose of the vampires. What's going on? Could it be that the tulips were the same as the blood roses, and they needed to be cultivated with blood? Colin temporarily suppressed the doubts in his heart, and followed Count Morrison to the castle's inner court. After settling the guards and servants, Colin and Vera comfortably took a hot bath. When they were dressed, the butler of the Morrison family, Montan, had been waiting outside for a long time. Lord Viscounts, the banquet is ready. Okay, please lead the way. Colin held onto Vera's hand as he followed the butler, Montan, through a long corridor before they finally arrived at the banquet hall. Hundreds of fragrant incense candles lit up the elegant and luxurious hall. However, the atmosphere of the banquet was not very lively. After all, everyone had just observed a moment of silence for the Duke of St. Hilda. The Morrison family didn't even have a band, so tonight's banquet was bound to be cold and solemn. When Vera held onto Colin's arm and walked into the room, everyone's eyes immediately focused on the Viscount's couple. Colin was wearing a wine-red Viscount suit, and there was a black tulip on his chest that was given to him by a servant of the Morrison family. It was a perfect match for Vera's black strapless dress. Vera's attire tonight wasn't too grand, and there weren't too many decorations on her body. Her golden hair was casually draped over her shoulders, and her snow-white and exquisite feet were wearing a pair of silver high-heeled sandals. There was a hint of laziness in her appearance. Earl Morrison hurriedly greeted Colin and his wife warmly and introduced several important people of the Morrison family to them. It had to be said that the Morrison family really had a fanatical love for the daughter of the House of St. Hilda. Colin had already greeted several ladies of the House of St. Hilda. However, they were all branch family members of the St. Hilda house. Even though their seniority was higher than Vera's, in terms of status, they couldn't compare to a daughter of the first wife like Vera. The only exception was the old Earl's wife, Grace St. Hilda. This Lady Grace was also the Duke of St. Hilda's aunt. Therefore, Vera had to address her as Grand Aunt. During the rebellion of the Lords of the Northern Frontier last year, the old Earl was publicly stabbed to death by Khan Sudwa because he refused to betray the Duke of St. Hilda. After the news spread to the Butterfly Castle, Lady Grace insisted on going to Winter City, despite the dissuasion of her family. She wanted to ask the Duke of St. Hilda for an explanation for her husband's death. As a result, the Duke of St. Hilda personally came to Floral City and attended the old Earl's funeral. He even became one of the 4 pallbearers. Many people thought that this kind of courtesy was because the Duke of St. Hilda felt guilty towards the old Earl. However, some people thought that the reason why the Duke of St. Hilda was so humble was entirely because of Lady Grace. In short, if there was a family that was least likely to betray the House of St. Hilda in the current chaotic situation, it had to be the Morrison family. This family had already been deeply entangled with the House of St. Hilda. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were a side branch of the House of St. Hilda in Floral City. Therefore, marriage was still useful, but the premise was that there were enough marriages. As long as you could make the wives of the important members of the other family become members of your own family, then this kind of bond would inevitably exceed the limit of interests. This was also the reason why Colin dared to accept the invitation of Earl Morrison to enter Floral City. Anyone could be roped in by the St. Thean family, but it was impossible for the Morrison family. Because time was too tight, I couldn't make it to your wedding, and I don't have any good gifts. I can only give you this bracelet that has accompanied me for most of my life. Lady Grace smiled as she held Vera's hand and tied a golden wheat bracelet on her hand. Thank you, Grandaunt. Vera's face was flushed. The meaning of wheat in the Empire of Light was many children, and it was quite appropriate to give it to the newlyweds. According to the customs, the bride generally needed something passed down from her mother or maternal elders. However, the Duchess had passed away many years ago, and Vera's biological mother had always been a mystery. At this time, Lady Grace's gift just made up for Vera's regret. Lady Grace smiled and patted Vera's hand, indicating that she did not need to be so polite. Then her face became serious. I am very sorry about your father's death. However, I am more curious about how he died. Vera told her about the situation at the wedding and added her own speculation about the Duke's death. Is it a forbidden spell similar to the Eyes of Petrification? Lady Grace thought for a moment and nodded. You guessed it right. It must be a forbidden spell that can kill a paladin. And it is very likely that the one who did it is Mr. C from the St. Thean family. I don't think so. Earl Morrison shook his head and said, casting a forbidden spell requires the sacrifice of one's life. However, Mr. C has been planning for so many years to take over the northern frontier, and he is about to succeed. Why would he be willing to exchange his life for the life of the Duke of St. Hilda at this time? I think so too. Scholar Dwayne nodded and agreed with Earl Morrison's words. If the St. Thean family was at an extreme disadvantage, then Mr. C might have made such a desperate counterattack. However, the current situation at the northern frontier. Scholar Dwayne did not continue, but everyone knew that the St. Thean family should have the upper hand in the current situation at the northern frontier. Lady Grace coughed twice to attract everyone's attention. She then sighed and said, perhaps the cost of this forbidden spell is not borne by Mr. C. Scholar Dwayne curiously asked, oh, respected Madam Grace, could it be that you know something? Just before the banquet, I just received a piece of news. Lady Grace looked dignified. Fallen Eagle City has been burned to ashes a few days ago. What? Everyone was immediately shocked by this news. Except for Colin. Of course, he already knew about this news, but he never said it. Thus, Madam Grace's news did not surprise him at all. However, Colin discovered something else that was very interesting. Even Count Morrison had only just found out about it. It seemed that Lady Grace was the real master of the Phoenix Butterfly Castle. Chapter 233. The banquet hall of the Butterfly Castle fell silent for a while. Everyone was still digesting the shocking news that Madame Grace had just told them. After a long while, a series of questions came out from everyone's mouth. Are you saying that the entire Eagle City has been turned into ashes? What about the residents of the city? Are they also? Is this the price of the forbidden spell that you mentioned just now? Is the Oman family crazy? In order to support the St. Thean family, they actually burned their own nest to the ground? Madame Grace pressed her hands down and comforted them. Everyone, This news was sent back by a merchant that has a good relationship with the Morrison family. I have already sent people to Eagle City to check it out. I am afraid that we will have to wait for some time to find out what happened there. Only then did everyone stop asking questions. However, they couldn't help but let their imaginations run wild. They whispered to each other and discussed animatedly. Colin also temporarily put away the surprised expression on his face and asked Vera, "Can the price of a forbidden spell really be transferred to the civilians of a city?" I am not sure. Vera frowned. At least from what I know, the price of a forbidden spell can only be borne by the caster. Scholar Dwayne said in a deep voice. But the one that killed the Duke of St. Hilda that day was a brand new forbidden spell. Therefore, it is very likely that Mr. Dwayne has developed a way to transfer the side effects of a forbidden spell. It is possible. Vera's expression became very serious. Everyone fell into silence. They had also come to their senses. If this was true, then the status of mages and the relationship between Yevil and the Empire of Light would most likely undergo an earth-shattering change. This is an inhumane evil spell. His Majesty will never allow such evil spells to appear in the Empire of Light. Earl Morrison's voice was a little sharp. Obviously, this forbidden spell was a great threat to every knight of the Empire. It could kill a paladin, and of course, it could also kill any knight. And the price for it seemed to be sacrificing some civilians. In the past, the nobles of the Empire were not too worried about the forbidden spells of the mages. Although the power of the forbidden spells was terrifying, it was still a means of exchanging lives for lives. As long as the mages were not forced into a corner, they would not fight to the death. However, if Mr. Fong was able to exchange the lives of the civilians for the lives of the paladins, without sacrificing his own life, even if it was at the cost of a city, and the lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians, it would still be a terrifying thing for the nobles of the Empire. Such a forbidden spell was like the sword of Damocles, hanging high above the heads of every Imperial knight. Colin and Scholar Dwayne looked at each other and sighed in unison. According to their previous analysis, the release of this forbidden spell in Fallen Eagle City was most likely approved by Emperor Reinhardt. The Emperor wanted to use this opportunity to restrain his uncle, the Holy Knight Prince Lacey. As for whether or not the Emperor's actions would bring trouble to himself, or even cause an even greater disaster, he could only wait and see how the situation developed. Madame Grace patted Count Morrison's arm, indicating that he did not need to be too alarmed. After we investigate the situation in Fallen Eagle City, I will send a letter to Imperial Dragon City and inform His Majesty. I believe His Majesty will not allow such an evil wizard to continue wreaking havoc within the Empire's borders. She then looked at Colin and asked, "Viscount Angley, are you going to escort the Duke's body back to Frostwinter?" Colin nodded and said, "Yes. Also, I am going to the Golden Lion Legion's encampment to persuade them to retreat to Frostwinter and temporarily avoid the rebel army." Madame Grace immediately frowned and asked, "Viscount Angley, is it your idea to have the Golden Lion Legion retreat to Frostwinter?" Before Colin could reply, Scholar Dwayne spoke first. "Madame Grace, this is the Duke's last wish." "Oh, is that so?" Madame Grace looked at the former confidant of the Duke with a playful gaze. "Yes." Scholar Dwayne's expression did not change as he continued to explain. The moment the Duke received news that the Menham family had sent troops to the northern frontier, he had already ordered the Golden Lion Legion to retreat. However, before he could send out the order, the Duke met with misfortune. Madame Grace did not seem to believe this explanation, but she could not refute it. After all, the Duke of St. Hilda had spent the last part of his life in Icestone City. Apart from Scholar Dwayne and Angeli and his wife, no one could say that they knew what the Duke was thinking in his last moments. Colin saw that Count Morrison still wanted to say something, so he spoke first. "Lord Count, I have long heard that the Morrison family's Phoenix Butterfly Legion's combat prowess is outstanding. Now that the northern frontier is in danger, is it time to send troops to quell the rebellion?" Hearing Colin praise his family's combat prowess as outstanding, Count Morrison blushed a little. The Phoenix Butterfly Legion was not considered a strong army on the northern frontier. Furthermore, Charles's defeat at the front lines last year had caused the death of the Phoenix Butterfly Legion's elites. However, in front of Colin and Vera, Count Morrison could not directly refuse. He could only put on a sad expression and sigh. Lord Viscounts, of course the Morrison family is willing to send troops to help the House of St. Hilda clear out the rebels. However, the famine this time caught us by surprise. Without enough food, I do not dare to send out the army easily. Actually, Count Morrison was not deliberately looking for an excuse. This time, the famine in the northern frontier came very suddenly, coupled with the fact that the House of St. Thean had secretly stockpiled food in advance with the help of the Tulip Merchant Guild and raised the price of food. It caused most of the lords in the northern frontier to be in a state of shortage of food. Other than the rebels who were already prepared, the only one who didn't have to worry about food was Colin, who had plundered the half-elf kingdom. At the beginning of the year, Count Morrison had personally gone to Icestone City to purchase food from Colin. At this time, Count Morrison was once again using the lack of food as an excuse in hopes of getting more food from Colin. Madame Grace also nodded in agreement. Viscount Angley, the Morrison family's food reserves are indeed very tight. However, our determination to support the House of St. Hilda has never wavered. How about this? I can promise you that if the Angeli family can solve the food problem of the Phoenix Butterfly Legion, then this legion will definitely appear on the front lines against the rebels. Hearing such a promise, Vera's eyes suddenly lit up. She excitedly held Madame Grace's hand and expressed her gratitude. However, Colin did not immediately agree. Who knew how big the food shortage of the Morrison family was? He did not want Angeli's territory to fall into a state of food shortage just to help them. Moreover, after Scholar Dwayne's analysis, Colin had already determined the most suitable strategic choice for the current situation: defense. Dragging the war into a stalemate, splitting up the vassal forces of the St. Thean family, and even finding a way to push Vera to the position of Dukes of the North first. This was the best choice. He did not want to take the initiative to fight to the death with the rebels. The Morrison family is indeed loyal to the northern frontier. Colin laughed as he flattered the other party. He then said carelessly, "How about this, Lord Count? You can first calculate the food needs of the Phoenix Butterfly Legion, then send someone to Icestone City to discuss with my butler Eamon." "Thank you so much." Count Morrison excitedly held Colin's hands. The Angeli family's help, the Morrison family will always remember it. Madame Grace seemed to have seen through Colin's perfunctory attitude, so she did not say anything more. Instead, she held Vera's hand and chatted about daily life. This old madam did not seem to be keen on taking the initiative to send out troops to fight the rebels. Colin did not mind. He raised his wine glass and began to entertain the gentlemen and noble women who came to chat. However, his mind was still paying attention to the faintly discernible smell of blood, trying to figure out its source. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.